Second Vice Chair Corvasi. Rep. Ackerman. Rep. Agello. Rep. Baginski.
Here.
Rep. Felix.
Here.
Rep. Hall. Rep. Kennedy.
Here.
Rep. Knight.
Here.
Rep. McGaw.
Here.
Rep. Nardone. Rep. Newberry.
Here.
Rep. Shawcross-Smith. Rep. Tansey.
Here.
Chairman, we have a quorum. We need to take a roll on that. Chairman Shanley. First Vice Chair Messier. Second Vice Chair Corvasi.
Yes.
Representative Ackerman. Representative Agello. Representative Baginski.
Yes.
Representative Felix.
I'm sorry, we couldn't hear on this side what the chairman was saying. I'm assuming it's holding for further study?
No, this is a vote for consideration on House Bill 5418 from Representative Amori. I've had my microphone replaced. Apparently the last one was not working. I apologize. So it was moved by Chairman Corvasi, seconded by Deputy Whip Ackerman, and I asked if anybody had any discussion points. Nobody said anything that's here in the room, but I'll open it up for anybody at home that may not have heard, that's on the committee, obviously. Okay, then we can continue with a roll call vote, Madam Clerk.
Representative Felix.
Yes.
Representative Hall. Representative Kennedy.
Yes.
Representative Knight.
Yes.
Representative McGaw. Representative Nardone.
Sorry.
Representative McGaw.
Yes.
Representative Newberry.
Yes.
Representative Shawcross-Smith. Representative Tansey.
Yes.
Thank you. There are 19 bills remaining on our calendar, and I would move that we hold all of those bills for further study. That would be House Bill 5496, 5562, 5565, 5578, 5602, 5608, 5622, 5623, 5624, 5740, 5746, 5747, 5752, 5887, 5888, 5889, 5891, 5892, and 5893. Moved by Chairman Corvasi, seconded by Deputy Whip Ackerman. Can we have a roll call vote, please, Madam Clerk?
Chairman Shanley.
Yes.
First Vice Chair Messier. Second Vice Chair Corvasi. Representative Ackerman. Representative Agello.
Yes.
Representative Baginski.
Yes.
Representative Felix.
Yes.
Representative Hall.
Yes.
Representative Kennedy.
Yes.
Representative Knight.
Yes.
Representative McGaw.
Yes.
Representative Nardone. Representative Newberry.
Yes.
Representative Shawcross-Smith. Representative Tansey.
Yes.
The ayes have it.
Thank you. The first bill we're going to move to tonight is House Bill 5891 from Representative Marzelkowski, an act relating to state affairs and government open meetings. This would amend the Open Meetings Act to allow virtual meetings and participation by electronic communication until July 1st of 2023. I understand Representative Marzelkowski is in another meeting. but Liz Tanner from the Department of Business Regulations is available to testify. Do we have Ms. Tanner on the phone? Good afternoon, Ms. Tanner. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Absolutely. When you're ready, go forward with your testimony on House Bill 5891 from Representative Marzelkowski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Liz Tanner. I am the Director of the Department of Business Regulation, and you might be wondering how DBR got involved with this bill. Throughout the pandemic, DBR has been the receiver of all questions and complaints from Rhode Island citizens, and many of those complaints in the beginning were about municipal government not being open, or that some public committees were not going to operate until COVID was over, thinking that it would only be a short time. So when it became apparent that municipal government needed to act quickly because it had become necessary for the public bodies to be able to meet remotely using teleconferencing and video conferencing, DBR stepped in to help and has continued to help to assist municipalities throughout the pandemic. Under the current law, pre-pandemic, remote attendance by board members was only allowed for active duty military and someone who was authorized to attend remotely by the Governor's Commission on Disabilities. However, this past April, in response to the pandemic, Governor Raimondo issued executive orders to permit entities to hold virtual meetings so that both state and municipal government could function very much like we're doing right now. So DBR took the lead quickly and offered to take a statewide role in virtual meetings when it purchased 100 Zoom enterprise licenses and offered one license to each municipality for free for the first year of the contract. Additional licenses were also provided to the state agencies for a fee at bulk rates. The Zoom license that the state provides to the municipalities is the creme de la creme of all Zoom licenses, and one that you can't normally purchase as a one-off, and if you do, it's quite expensive. So DBR, along with a large crew of folks who are experts in this area, created a guide so good that the National Governors Association sent it to all 50 states as a model. So Rhode Island is certainly leading in that area. And this group also did a few seminars to show meeting organizers how best to run a virtual public meeting. So we've been very successful and will continue to work with municipalities and other government agencies on purchasing future licenses for future virtual meeting usage at a very deep discount. So what does this bill do? It recreates the same format that we have now through a later date. It's exactly as the executive order currently stands, how we've all conducted public meetings since spring. The bill would amend the Open Meetings Act to codify the provisions for virtual meetings that was set forth in executive orders by Governor Raimondo and then recently signed again by Governor McKee. DBR drafted this bill with the assistance of a team that has helped guide, that helped create the guide and create the seminars that was first assembled in June. And I think it's important to see what a wide variety of folks we had in this working group, which was DBR, legal counsels and staff members, Division of Information Technology project manager, a city clerk, a town clerk, a municipal planner, 3 municipal solicitors, the Attorney General's Open Government Unit, the Department of State, the League of Towns and Cities, and Common Cause of Rhode Island. The bill provides that any member of a public body may attend a meeting by virtual means through telephone or audio-video conferencing and shall be included in the quorum, which will be especially helpful for those who are sick or infirm during this crisis. The bill also provides that the public shall be provided access to all open meetings under the Act. The bill requires that meeting agendas include information on how to attend the meeting remotely and that meeting minutes indicate whether each member of the public body attended in person or virtually. Due to some concerns raised by the League of Towns and Cities, the working group requests that the bill sunset on July 1st, 2023, to give all interested parties time to determine what the post-pandemic Open Meetings Act should allow relative to virtual participation and attendance. It also gives public entities time to purchase, install, and train staff to use the audiovisual technology necessary to hold hybrid meetings and in-person meetings that provide virtual access and participation to the public. I should note that DBR will be providing municipalities with a list of the most and best economical equipment to purchase to allow for the meetings. And as to costs, in anticipation of the Biden stimulus package, we have not requested any dollars with this bill. Just to point out that some of the concerns that have been raised by both state and municipal public bodies, since they have been holding virtual and hybrid meetings, some of the challenges include, and I think we've all experienced this, that while an all virtual meeting is the simplest option, it still requires the host to understand the technology in order to hold a successful meeting. So there's a need, a desire to continue to educate and train those who will be holding these. And we know that a hybrid meeting requires equipment and IT knowledge, and increased IT staffing needs, as well as time from our clerks and the cost of the equipment. But despite the challenges, many municipalities have successfully hosted hybrid meetings for council and planning and zoning boards, which has been well received. Some of those benefits include municipal entities consistently have reported to us, and I'm sure to many of you as well, increased participation in their meetings as a result of holding the meetings remotely. And what we've learned from the public are simple but important things like they don't have to hire a babysitter to attend an evening meeting or leave work early to attend a daytime meeting, and that the meeting materials are being digitized and made available to the public on the websites ahead of the meeting. And then finally, and very important, is that public bodies have seen the benefits to board members and staff because it's so much easier to receive a quorum when there is either something like inclement weather or someone quarantining or they're sick or they're out of state. So, and just one last point that there will need to be a sub-A for a few minor changes that we are working out. And with that, I'll take any questions that the committee might have.
Any questions for Ms. Tanner? Chair. Representative Knight.
Thank you, Ms. Tanner, for a comprehensive presentation. I just want to make sure that I understand one thing. I think the bill would, if passed, would require that the meeting, whatever the meeting is, it is both in person and accessible virtually at the same time, no questions asked and with no exceptions. Is that correct?
So that is a requirement just like it is right now. So the same requirement exists currently. Yes, it does.
Okay, so I just want to make it clear. Anybody in the state post-pandemic, if we're assuming we get to post-pandemic, if they're going to run a meeting, it has to be both in person and have a layer of technology on top of it to enable remote access for anyone who wants to participate via remote access. No questions asked, no exceptions. You can't do one or the other depending on the circumstances, right?
And that's exactly why we have the sunset provision in there, so that we can determine what the best end date for this would be, or if we want to have an end date, or if we all agree that this is the way to go forward for forever.
Okay, thank you. I just want to point out that my town manager doesn't email me very much about bills. He emailed me about this one and said this would be tough because it's the hybrid model. Running a hybrid model requires more manpower, more expertise than running just a virtual and remote meeting alone, or just an in-person alone. And I note that the bill comes with no dollars to help out the municipalities to cover that.
Chairman Corvese.
So, but this has a sunset July 1st, 2023.
Correct.
Okay. But the testimony we just heard was to continue it past that.
Well, that would be up for debate at that point.
But that's not the substance of the bill before us.
Do you have an amendment you'd want to propose to?
Absolutely not. What I'm saying is what we have before us sunsets on July 1st, 2023.
Unless extended.
But that is not in the book. That's not what we're discussing. Correct?
It says that in the description of the legislation on the last page.
Well, okay. And the last page says,
This act would amend the Open Meetings Act to allow virtual meetings and participation by electronic communication until July 1st, 2023. The amendment would sunset on July 1st of 2023. The current substantive provisions of the Open Meetings Act would be adopted and effective on July 1, 2023.
So on July 1st, 2023, we go back to the old way, where there is no electronic communication, and everything has to be done in person.
Correct.
Okay. But I think the testimony I was hearing was to continue it past July 1st, 2023. No? But right
Yes.
now, we're only dealing with July 1st, 2023.
Yes, from now until July, or if it's passed, from when it's passed until July 1st, 2023.
And why are we designating July 1st, 2023 as opposed to December 31st, 2022?
That would be a question for the sponsor. I'm not sure if Ms. Tanner is able to answer that question.
Can you answer that question?
That was a date that was agreed upon based on some public health information
Agreed
Where we
upon by,
think we're-
agreed upon by who?
by the working group to say that we think that we still might have mask usage.
And who is
As
the
far
work,
as-
and who comprised the working group?
So I had gone through that list of, let me walk through it again. The Department of Business Regulation, the Department of Information Technology, a city clerk, a town clerk, a municipal planner, 3 municipal solicitors, the Attorney General's Open Government Unit, the Department of State, a League of Towns and Cities, and the Common Cause.
Common Cause. Okay, thank you.
Any further question, or Representative Newberry?
Yeah, I just want to echo Representative Knight's comments. I don't know who was on the working group. I mean, we heard the titles, and I have not heard from either of the towns I represent, but I'm less concerned about the cost, though I think that's a factor too, and just the manpower. We routinely see bills in this building on all sorts of topics that affect what towns need to do, planning boards, zoning boards. I don't think sometimes there's a realization of the burdens that small towns have getting people to handle these things. Sometimes we have trouble getting people to serve on boards, let alone run meetings. We only have so many employees in our town clerk's office. There's only so much they can do. I understand the intent of this, but the hybrid, not giving an option, I think, is not a good idea.
Chairman
One
Corvese?
final comment. One final comment, I would like to see, if anything of this nature goes forward, that the sunset is December 31st, 2022.
Okay.
Chairman?
We have a voice from the
it's,
audience. Is that Chairman Kennedy? Or
Speaker
Speaker
Pro Tem Kennedy.
Yes.
Yes, so a quick question. I too am concerned about the fact that we're extending this out so far into the future, and based on what Director Tanner said, it would appear that the ultimate goal here is to, after there's been enough input over time and everything, that this may become a permanent thing. It doesn't, unlike what Chairman Corvese is thinking it's going to go away, it almost sounds to me like they're looking to codify in the future having this hybrid model going forth into the future as of, even though we're saying we're sunsetting it July 1st of 2023, which seems so far out. I mean, my God, we're talking 2 years and 3 months away from that particular, or 3.5 months from that date. I can't imagine that we're still going to be in pandemic times, end of times, up until 2023, based on everything that has been said, particularly about the vaccine coming on board. So I'm concerned about how far out into the future that we're looking to do this. We know how difficult this has been for the General Assembly to have to conduct business in this particular way, and we're hoping we're going to be back in the building before the end of this session so that we can start to see a little bit of normalcy taking place. But I'm concerned about that very, very long date off into the future of 2023. The other thing, while I congratulate the Department of Business Regulation for getting the best Zoom-type technology that they've shared with the cities and towns, I'm not sure that Zoom is that great of a system. I mean, we know that the servers are based in China, that information that's shared within these particular things can be shared with the Chinese government, and I think that in itself, there's a reason we're using WebEx, because it's a secure system that's based in the United States as opposed to a system that's based in China. So I just bring that forth for consideration.
Any further questions for Ms. Tanner?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman, but I misspoke. I meant December 1st, 2021. My apologies.
Okay. Representative Felix.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tanner, I just have a question. Do you have any data in terms of public participations in these open meetings, given the virtual accessibility?
As
Whether or
in
not the public-
satisfaction with it, do you mean?
Excuse me?
Do you mean like as in satisfaction with it or increased numbers?
Increased numbers, or both if you have them, but in particular, I'm interested in learning whether or not the public has been able to participate more in these open meetings because of the technology.
So while we have no data, it's been readily apparent to anyone who's been involved in public meetings that there is greater participation because it's easier to participate via remote means. That is something that I can work with the League of Towns and Cities on and see if we can gather some information to provide some actual numbers. But at this time, we don't have any actual data.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to if whenever it's available to get some information, because I think another point that hasn't been mentioned is that the technology makes it easier for people to be able to participate. And I'm going to go ahead and assume and make an educated guess that probably the numbers are higher. So whether it's Zoom, whether it's WebEx or any other technology, I am in agreement with Rep. Knight in terms of the burden on our local municipalities, but the benefit really is there in terms of allowing our constituents to be able to access the meetings that they otherwise might not be able to access. So for that reasons, for me personally, I'm in support of this bill. Thank you.
I'll just add that from a housing standpoint, one of the biggest complaints that we hear is achieving a quorum. You know, that's very often a reason for delay in construction. And this allows you to achieve a quorum by folks so that if they're a snowbird or if they're sick or whatever it might be, it allows for achieving a quorum because you can have people who aren't physically present. So I think that's important to consider that as well, please.
Chairman, I just have a comment, if I may.
Yeah, Representative Tanzi.
Thank you. If the deadline, the sunset should be up for consideration to be changed, I would just recommend that it be done at a point when the General Assembly is in session so that we would have an opportunity to review and extend if we deemed it necessary at the time. So just using that as consideration, something like maybe 3 or 4 weeks after we've been back in session in that January.
Okay. Representative Knight.
I'm sorry, this won't be every bill.
It's Bill 1 of 20.
But I just, Liz, you're still on the line. I think, I think the objections of municipalities might ease somewhat. And I agree with everything you say about this bill being good for public access. I know public participation has really gone up with the advent of doing things remotely and digitally, and I think it's a good idea. So just to complete my thought that I put out before, if there was a little bit of discretion in the bill, that might help a little bit. And I'm thinking that if a member of a board needs virtual access, then they can set up for it, or if a member of the public wants virtual access, then, I don't know what that would look like, but maybe that's an area of investigation. I know it's easy just to say, look, this is the way it is. It's got to be hybrid and in person all at the same time, but maybe just a little bit of discretion would go a long way.
Thank you. We would welcome working with you and others based on the concerns you've raised.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Tanner? All right. Moving forward, for the rest of the witnesses for this committee, we're going to be doing a time limit of 2 minutes per witness. We do have a substantial number of witnesses signed up on some of these bills, and we only have this room until 7 o'clock. So we want to make sure we're able to hear testimony from everybody that has signed up to testify. I did give some leeway to Ms. Tanner because she was standing in for Representative Marzelkowski to introduce the bill, but I'd ask everybody, where possible, to limit themselves to 2 minutes going forward, please. The next Witnesses we have signed up are John Marion, Andrew Tights, Steve Brown, and Randall Rose. So if Mr. Marion is on the line, we'll take him next. Good afternoon, Mr. Marion. We're here talking about House Bill 5891 from Representative Marzelkowski. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I will just note I submitted some written testimony only on a somewhat similar bill on the URI Board of Trustees. I am just going to briefly make 3 points. I want to just lift up the Department of Business Regulations has done a tremendous amount of work in the last 12 months to make sure municipal governments are able to meet online. And, you know, I think we tend to highlight bad stories of government sometimes and not lift up the good ones. And the DBR deserves a lot of credit because they really kept municipal government running in the state of Rhode Island. So I'm grateful they put this bill forward. We hope eventually, I guess my second point, is that a long-term policy solution can be found to integrate technology into public meetings. As you know, this is a sunset. It represents a compromise to sort of push off making the long-term decisions. And, you know, we hope the long-term decisions can come forward. It's going to require trade-offs. The last point, and the reason we're not supporting the bill but taking no position, is that we think it needs to have some guardrails on virtual meetings, especially if it's going to go on for another 2.5 years. In my written testimony highlights some of the guardrails. I won't enumerate them here, but we think it's a start. We think it needs some work, but we're glad DBR is working on it. So thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions for Mr. Marion? Thank you. Next witness we have is Andrew Tights.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tights. This is the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Representative Marzelkowski's bill, and you've signed up to testify in support. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Andrew Tights, T as in Thomas, E-I-T-Z. I am an attorney. I've been practicing for over 35 years, and in that time also as municipal solicitor. And our firm represents 5 towns and 1 city currently. I'm also a certified planner by the American Institute of Certified Planners. And I have been involved with the ad hoc committee that you probably heard already about, that Director Tanner had helped put together, of the different people working on this bill. And I am speaking in support of it as someone who goes to at least 4 or 5 meetings a week, most in the evening, but some during the day. I have seen a big change over the last year, and most of it has been for the good. Participation has increased by having virtual meetings. This has not always been favorable for the people the members of the council who might be staying there. But I have seen our town council meetings have much greater participation. I've also seen greater participation on the volunteer side. A zoning board member who had a baby, and normally we wouldn't have seen her for several months for the next meeting before she came to a meeting, was able to be there. She's on mute, the baby is in the background, but she's still able to be participating, and we're able to have that volunteer service to the board and the community. So I think people are really appreciating the ability to have these remote meetings, and my big concern is if suddenly one can hope the vaccine is going to be wildly successful and everybody will be vaccinated, but I don't think that people will be happy going back to the way things were. And we should evolve over time into a system where some meetings are in person and some meetings are remote, but there's availability so that everybody has fair public access to all of it. And that's, I think, our goal here. And I think one of the key goals is the fact there's a sunset provision on this with a hard date so that there's 2 legislative cycles. And if it's not working out, the legislature does not have to do anything at all to let it end. It will sunset automatically, and we'll go back. But at least we'll have 2 years to work with it and experiment and probably, hopefully, make changes and develop it over time. And I would also like to thank particularly Director Tanner and the other state agencies involved. I think on behalf of the cities and towns, they've been a big help with helping to provide the support, technical, and the Zoom license, et cetera. And I think going forward with that cooperative effort, we'll be able to make something that we all knew was going to come someday and suddenly arrived in our lap without warning last spring. We'll be able to make it a good experience for the public and everyone going forward in the future. Beyond that, I'm open to any questions if anyone had any questions from me.
Any questions for Mr. Tights? No, thank you. Next, we will move on to Steve Brown from the ACLU. Good afternoon, Mr. Brown. We're here discussing Representative Marzelkowski's bill, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. The ACLU of Rhode Island shares the comments that Mr. Marion gave earlier. This bill essentially does codify what's been going on across the state as a result of the DBR's efforts this past year to have remote meetings based on the executive orders that have been issued. When the first executive order was issued by Governor Raimondo a year ago, the ACLU and Common Cause suggested a series of amendments to the guardrails that Mr. Marion was talking about. They're included in the testimony we've submitted, and I won't go over them either, but we do believe that if this is to be codified for the near future, those guardrails should be put in to make sure that public participation is as it should be. The only other point I would make is I know there's been discussion about the sunset date. We agree with some of the committee members that 2023 seems very, very far away, and we would ask that it be pared back to July of 2022 at the latest, when the General Assembly could review it, but we don't think it should go longer than that. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Brown? Okay, next we will move to Randall Rose. Good afternoon, Mr. Rose. We're here discussing Representative Marzelkowski's bill, and you have the floor. We are doing a 2-minute limit on testimony, so if you could try and be concise, that would be much appreciated.
Thank you. Yes, I am opposed to this bill. I think that, first of all, the public meetings are a lot easier for people to participate in if they're in person. A lot of people who aren't very tech savvy or don't have much access to technology or find it easier to attend an in-person meeting than an online meeting. And what this bill does is it allows the meetings to continue being online for more than the next 2 years, even after the COVID emergency ends. And I understand how people in government might want to be extra careful and avoid having in-person public meetings even after the emergency is declared over. But if the emergency is declared over and the rest of us have to meet and do things in person, then I think that government officials should also have to come to in-person meetings and face the public. I know it can be a little uncomfortable to face members of the public in person, but it is part of democracy and it should be restored as soon as the COVID emergency is over. So I think, so I'm opposed to this bill. I think the public meeting should resume once the emergency is over, and there shouldn't be, and this bill shouldn't be an excuse to declare the emergency. It shouldn't be an opportunity to just declare the emergency over and continue not having in-person public meetings. When government officials are comfortable meeting with the public and feel it's safe to meet the public, then you can declare the emergency over. So for those reasons, I'm opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Any questions for Randall from members of the committee? All right, that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5891. Next, we're going to move to Representative Geraldo's bills. If you want to know if you want to go use the podium, Representative Geraldo, He has House Bill 5752, 5746, and 5747. We'll take the bills in whatever order you would like, Representative Geraldo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can start with 5752,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
You have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the House Committee on State Government and Elections. I want to thank you for taking the time to have me here to discuss Bill H5752. This would require the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Opportunity to create for all state employees to receive annual training in cultural competency. It would define cultural competency as an understanding of how institutions and individuals can respectfully respond to people from all different backgrounds, such as race, language, economic background, gender, veteran status, disability status, and immigration status. To me, I really believe that although we are the same in some ways, cultural differences matter. Understanding people's distinct cultures, languages, home lives, and values help public servants adapt how they communicate. And I think it's important that all of us remember, of course, that we, along with everyone else in state government, are servants of the public, a public that is ever-changing, full of diversity and different experiences that craft the lenses in which they view the world. I'm sure that all of us, in our own professions, in some way, shape, or form, have encountered situations in which we've encountered someone with a language barrier, or someone who is differently able than we are, or just someone of a different culture or background. And I think it's completely reasonable that we dedicate to the public that we serve one training a year to focus on how the state can better serve them. And I get it, to define what cultural competency can be a difficult thing. Engaging how culturally competent someone is versus another can also be difficult. But I believe that we owe it to ourselves and the Rhode Islanders we serve to put our best foot forward and to serve them the best way that we can. As someone who is biracial myself, born to a white French-Canadian mother and a Colombian father who immigrated here when he was 17 from Colombia, I've had a unique opportunity to see how people of different cultures and different backgrounds experience government differently. For example, my mother's side of the family, having lived here for generations and generations, are far more comfortable walking right into City Hall, calling their congressperson, or contacting a state office for support. My father's side, while 100% committed to the American dream, isn't as comfortable. They're more hesitant. They're sometimes reluctant to reach out to government officials of any kind, and that's probably due to a combination of unfamiliarity with the system, and also, frankly, a distrust of government that remains from having fled a country in which some police and government officials couldn't always be trusted. These differences are important, and I think they're important to recognize. And therefore, I simply ask that we take a few minutes each year and dedicate it to better understanding those that pay our salaries. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for hearing my testimony today. And I urge passage of the bill, and I want to give a special thank you to you, Mr. Chairman, for your work on this bill in prior years. And I'm thankful and beyond appreciative to have you as a co-sponsor and for your guidance with this. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any questions for Representative Geraldo? All right. There are no witnesses signed up on that bill, so that will conclude testimony on 5752. So we can move on to 5746, an act relating to public property.
Thank you. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman and members of the House, for hearing me today speak about H5746. This is a companion bill to one in the Senate, put forward by my good friend Senator Cano, who has done a ton of work in this area. This bill would provide an exception to the requirements of the competitive sealed bidding for qualified local minority and women-owned business enterprises. It would also provide for a clear and transparent process for when a waiver of compliance is granted. The bill states that when a reliable and responsible bidder is certified as a minority-owned business enterprise or a women-owned business enterprise and submits a bid of $1,400,000 or less, the bid of the minority or woman enterprise minority or women-owned business enterprise would be deemed the lowest bid unless it exceeds the bid of the lowest bidder by more than 10%. This is aimed at addressing the traditional imbalance of low minority firm selection here in our state, as well as help those businesses grow through greater access to the large market of government contracts. More and more, we are seeing that the success or failure of minority and women-owned businesses affect more than just the businesses it targets. As the minority population continues to grow, the results of this group's business endeavors will continue to affect issues of wealth creation and poverty reduction on a much larger scale in each of our communities. But knowing all this, Rhode Island's MBE contract compliance comes in at a depressing D+, based on a study by the Rhode Island Black Business Association. And a Boston Globe article that maybe some of you saw this summer, from June of 2020, showed that Rhode Island itself failed to use any minority contractors, not a single one of them, for the $34 million worth of contracts for the work done in our field hospitals. Qualified MBEs that were in dire need of a lifeline did not see a penny, and they're still struggling today. So in summary, one of the things I want to point out is that there's very few reasons that a waiver should even be granted in the first place. And if the need arises, then this bill will also ensure that the public knows why in an open and transparent way. Thank you.
Representative Newberry.
Just quick question. Where does the $1.4 million figure come from? Like, why is that the dollar amount in the bill?
That's actually a great question. I don't have the immediate answer to that. I can get back to you. I'll ask the person on the other side.
Any further questions for the sponsor? Okay. Representative Geraldo, we can move on to 5747 when you're ready.
Thank you.
Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. We have one witness that signed up to testify on both bills. So yeah, why don't we have you introduce 5747 and then Ms. Bruno will call her to testify on both bills.
Sure. Wonderful. Thank you. So once again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the House Committee on State Government and Elections for having me today to speak on 5747, which is also another companion bill to Senator Kano's bill in the Senate. This would require the Department of Administration to provide a list of certified minority and women-owned business enterprises to each prospective contractor of a construction project, and would prohibit the issuance of a waiver from this requirement until the contractor received assistance from the department. We've all heard that the entrepreneurial activity of our minority-owned and women-owned businesses are vital for healthy economic growth. Yet, despite their importance to the economy, entrepreneurs are not always well supported by state policy and took a very massive hit during the pandemic. In fact, in his presentation to the House Committee on Small Business the other day that I was participating in, Treasurer Magaziner highlighted the drastic numbers that showed how minority, Black, and Latino, and Asian businesses were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, many of them closing. Minority businesses are rapidly increasing their presence and influence in the economy, and a Kauffman Foundation study found that minorities, especially African Americans, are 50% more likely to start their own business than our other demographic groups. In addition to strong entrepreneurial propensity among minorities, studies have found high success rates in minority-owned businesses. But again, knowing all this, Rhode Island continues to have a D+ rating in terms of its MBE contract compliance. And once again, last summer, the state of Rhode Island waived the MBE contract requirement where our minority businesses lost out on $3.4 million in a time that was absolutely critical. So in summary, again, there's very few reasons why a waiver should even be granted in the first place, but this bill would ensure that whenever there is a waiver, it's nice and clear and transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Geraldo. Any questions for Representative Geraldo on either bill? Representative Agello.
Thank you, Chairman Shanley. Representative Geraldo, this sounds very interesting and appealing to me. I'm wondering, do any other states do anything similar? And in a related way, are very low grade on the use of minority-owned businesses by in state contracting, was that very low grade in comparison to other states, or was it the grade given by the Minority Business Association here in Rhode Island?
So there are certainly other states that do it, that have their regulations much better than we are to support their minority business enterprises, and I can get who does it better and get that back to you. And then I missed the second part. Can you repeat the second part of the question?
Is this legislation modeled on other states or new here?
I don't think this was actually modeled on other states. I think it was primarily focused on making sure that we do not allow waivers to be granted in times of critical need when our minority businesses have much to offer, making sure that they don't get cut out of the process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any
Good
further
work.
questions
Thank you.
for Representative Geraldo? Thank you. The witness that had signed up elected not to testify, so that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5746 and 5747. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Next, we'll move to Representative Cardillo's bill, House Bill 5608. Representative Cardillo, welcome. Thank you for coming in.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. Well, what this bill is to make a fully online division of motor vehicles. As anyone knows who's gone to the DMV, it's had a history of problems and wait times. I mean, this goes on for decades, I think. And I think now is the time to make it fully online, include registrations for motor vehicles. I mean, especially during this pandemic time, I mean, the wait times have been over months. I know in September when I bought a new car, I had to wait approximately close to 2 months before I got it registered. And so if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us about technology that they have out today, in which I'm sure we can come up with a situation to make it very convenient to make it fully online. I mean, I cannot see a person going to the registry, having a minor problem because of a signature, has to go back, get it signed or whatever, and come back. So now they take 2 days out of work instead of 1. And all I'm trying to do is make it convenient for the working people. Many states do this. They have online services for registrations. Some even have drop-off boxes at the registry. And you should be able to, I mean, I know you can. There's applications that you can pull up online on different states, fill in the application. I mean, it has everything on there from the owner's documents, the license number, the bill of sale, the title, the fees, the insurance, so you can register it. And once you register it, I believe you can print out a temporary plate that's good for so many days, and then the registry will mail you back within a number of days your registration for your vehicle. And also for new car dealers should be very easy to do also, everything online, because their titles are MSOs, their manufacturer statement of origin, come right from the new vehicle manufacturers. So there's no VIN inspection, there's nothing. And that's another thing, now that we get into online. Once you get a Rhode Island, especially on Rhode Island titled vehicles, everything's in the Rhode Island computer at the DMV. So when you go in to register your car, once you punch in that VIN number, it's going to come up with the previous owner and the whole history. So technically, you don't need it to go to NCIC, but it could, because they have the capability there to make sure it's not stolen or anything else. And I think it would be a good idea, especially, I've had numerous people ask me about that. How come we haven't done that yet? And I agree. I think it's a great idea. We do everything else online, from banking to lottery to unemployment, you name it. But anyways, that's the whole status on the bill itself. And I appreciate your consideration.
Any questions for Representative Cardillo? Representative Agello.
Just one question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question, Representative Cardillo. Do any other states allow this now?
Yes.
They do.
Yes, I believe Florida, New York, I believe, there's quite a few states, as a matter of fact, Arizona, I think Texas does, South Carolina.
Entirely online.
Please?
Entirely online.
I'm sorry, I couldn't,
Entirely online.
yes, the online registration.
Thank you.
Any further
Any other
questions
questions?
for Representative Cardillo? Representative Kennedy, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question? Guess not. Okay, we have one witness signed up on 5608, Walter Craddock from the DMV. Good afternoon, Mr. Craddock. Welcome. We're here discussing Representative Cardillo's bill, House Bill 5608. You are signed up with no position on the bill. You have the floor, sir.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm also here with Brad Booth, my legal counsel at the DMV. I'd like to address two quick comments to Rep. Cardillo. Number one, our wait times currently, once you get in the door and get your ticket, is only about 12 minutes. We're down from about 70 minutes prior to COVID, down to 12-minute wait time right now. Yes, there is about a 4-week time for appointments, but again, that's also something that we're currently working on with development of a new reservation system. And we also do have drop boxes outside each of our offices for people to do the transactions, where if they choose not to come in, they can drop it in, and the information is processed and transmitted usually overnight. Now, in regards to H5608, he's proposing to allow online registrations by all dealerships in the state of Rhode Island. Currently, we have close to 500 motor vehicle dealers. 26 of them currently have online capability. They're the larger new car dealers. They're able to access our system and do the registrations directly. The other dealers, the other 456 dealers that we have out there, for the most part, are smaller dealers who do not have the MSO that he referred to. They have titles that are being transferred from one party to another that have to be verified manually to make sure that they are properly transferred from one person to the other. I will tell you that we do value our partnership with our online dealers, but there are problems that result from the ones that we have, and they've been doing this for a number of years. We have one employee who is dedicated to working with those dealerships, and she spends about 40% of her day correcting errors that they make or answering phone calls because they can't understand how to do a transaction, even though they do them on a regular basis. They have 1 to 2 people in each dealership of those that we have currently online, and unfortunately, we're only able to provide them with about 3 weeks of training before we can get them back to the dealerships. In comparison, a CSR that we put on the counter to work with our customers takes about 3 months to properly train to do registration transactions on their own to try to minimize on the errors. If we were to mandate all other 556 licensed motor vehicle dealers to do online transactions, the only way we could do that to properly service them to make sure that there are no errors entering the system would require hiring an additional 27 DMV staff members to provide the proper training, auditing, to make sure these people are securing the information appropriately. We would also have to provide regular BCI checks because these people can touch the records, and if these people are not certified through the Attorney General's office, we could potentially lose our Real ID certification from the federal government, and we'd have to stop issuing Real ID credentials. In addition to that 27 staff members, I will note that the annual cost is approximately $2.5 million for those people that we would have to hire. There's also an additional cost that the legislation doesn't address, that for each dealer to start up, it's anywhere from $2,400 to $4,200 per dealership for the equipment that would be put in there. There is also another $1,160,000 of licensing fees that have to be purchased for these dealerships. These licensing fees are for the software that we have for document retention with outside vendors. So we're talking anywhere from $4,900 to $6,700 per dealership as startup costs, and then each dealership would be responsible for $2,500 of ongoing license fees on an annual basis. They would also be responsible to have liability insurance to protect the state against cyber threats or data breaches through their systems, because keep in mind, we have, as the DMV, we are the repository for extensive personal identifying information on our citizens. We have over 800,000 registrations and over 750,000 credentials. We have to protect the personal information of each of our citizens to make sure that any breaches are not from a state system or anybody accessing the state system. With that, I would ask Brad, do you have anything to add? And Brad is nodding no, he does not, so if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. And also, I have submitted written testimony on this.
Any questions for Mr. Craddock?
Sure, I want to address Mr. Craddock. Mr. Craddock, there are apps out there and software that will correct the problems you're stating. They have, it will spit out any wrong information that you put on these applications, and it will correct it, tell you if it's right or wrong.
I would have to see that information, sir, and also, is that compatible with the underlying system that we have in place?
I don't know what system you have in place, but, and
Well,
also...
I don't know if you recall, but about 3 years ago, we did a system modernization. We were the first in the country to modernize an entire DMV system in a big bang. We did the whole system at once, successfully, and since that time, done over 10 million successful transactions. So we have a very stable and secure system, and we have to be very careful. We have to be sure that if there's an app that you talk about that will spit this out, is it compatible with our underlying system and would not cause any system failures.
What is more important than your bank systems? They have it. You're working with money. That's number one. Number two is, let me tell you something. I was there myself. I had to register another new car this month, and I couldn't get an appointment for almost 3 weeks. And at this time, it should be able to get it immediately.
Representative, I'm going to have you take the conversation with Director Craddock offline and have you guys have your debate offline so we can get to the rest of the calendar. Are there any other questions for Director Craddock? No. Then that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5608. Thank you very much, Representative Cardillo.
Thank you.
Next, we are going to move to Representative Tabone's bill, House Bill 5578. Mr. Tabone, Representative Tabone is available via WebEx. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. This bill, I've been putting it in for about 5 years, actually 6 years now. The reason for my bill is back in 2015, I was in my vehicle. Now, I had stepped out of my vehicle and it was stolen. and I had bought the vehicle at secondhand at a dealer that was not a Chevy, and my vehicle happened to be a Chevy Cruze, and it had OnStar. When they were selling it to me, they really didn't talk about the importance of it. I had heard about it, but I just needed a vehicle at the time. Shortly after having my vehicle, as I said, I stepped away for it for a little bit. It was January 15th. It was 1 degree, and I left the car running. I went across the street. When I came back, the vehicle was taken. At that moment, I called the police immediately, and I tell them that the vehicle has OnStar. They asked me if I can activate, if it's active. I said no. And at that moment, I called OnStar. They said that they could not activate it at that moment either. That all happened in a very short span of time. And as I kept trying to figure out ways for them to allow me to make a payment in its entirety for the year, where they could press a button and the police would be able to locate the vehicle, that just was not going to happen. A few days later, I don't know if you guys remember, but my very good friend, Mayor Diosa at the time, happened to be in Providence and see the vehicle and followed him, and then we were able to recover the vehicle. What we learned throughout the 3 days that it was missing is that these kids were speeding up and down the south side of Providence, and I started thinking of how many people could have been hurt or an accident that could have occurred. So I thought it would be good for the insurance company because God forbid something happened, somebody's going to be on the hook. I thought that even if it wasn't the insurance company, we're talking about human lives that were at risk because of recklessness of youth or whoever would have stolen it. All because we could not press a button because of the activation. So I put this forth because I believe that it's our responsibility, and this is public safety, a protection bill, that if we can work with OnStar or work with any type of vehicle recovery device or entity to make sure that we keep people from harm's way, and that owner who didn't activate it for whatever the reason may be, has a second opportunity to do that, but not to be off the hook so easily. And therefore, that's why I suggested that it gets paid in its entirety or a good portion of it. I understand that OnStar GM, it's a corporation. I understand that those revenues determine stock prices and all that stuff. And so I respect that part, but I also need them to respect, again, the human life aspect of it. So that's the bill that I've put forth on several occasions, and I'm hoping that this body considers it. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer at this time.
Thank you. Any questions for Representative Tabone? No questions. Oh, Representative Knight has a question for you.
Okay.
Rep. Tabone, I don't have any questions. I like the idea. It took me a little bit to wrap my head around it when I was reading it today, but I like the idea.
Thank you, Representative.
Any further questions or comments for Representative Tabone? Well, that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5578. Next, we move to House Bill 5602 from Representative O'Brien, an act relating to state affairs in government, video lottery games, table games, and sports wagering. It establishes a player self-exclusion program with winnings collected from self-excluded players going to RICPG for research, education, and prevention of teenage gambling addiction. I'm not sure that Representative O'Brien is available to testify, but we do have John Tassioni signed up in support of the legislation. Is Mr. Tassioni available? Good afternoon, Mr. Tassoni. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing Representative O'Brien's bill, and you are signed up in support. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is John Tassoni, former state senator. I am now the board chair of the RICPG, which represents a cohort of different individuals on the board, including the state police, Attorney General's office, and others. Our mission is to help with prevention and education. And this program that they have, the self-exclusion program, which is an individual who signs up voluntarily on self-exclusion not to go into the casinos or any portion of gaming because of an issue that he may have in previous years, decides to sneak into Twin River, play the table games or play slot machines, and hits it big. At that point, the state would look and see if he is, and I know there's some language by the lottery, which I'm okay with. They talked to me today about that. And that the winnings would not go to the person who self-excluded, but would go to the Rhode Island Council on Problem Gambling, and that money would be used for prevention and education. I think it's self-explanatory. I know the lottery has some sub-A language that they would like to submit, which I'm okay with, and I'll take any questions delivered to me.
Any questions for Senator Tassoni? No questions. Thank you very much. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 5602. Next, we move to House Bill 5622 from Representative Norway. Representative Norway is in another committee meeting. This is an act relating to military affairs and defense, Emergency Volunteer Health Practitioners Act. It permits medical vets services by healthcare volunteers during an emergency. We have one witness signed up in support, Mr. Thomas Hemmendinger. Is Mr. Hemmendinger available? Good afternoon, Mrs. Hemmendinger. We're here in the House Committee on State Government and Elections discussing Representative Norway's bill. You are signed up in support, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. I'm a member of the Rhode Island Commission on Uniform State Laws, and this bill is based on a uniform law that's been adopted in 19 other states. And I realize you've got a full agenda, so I'll just point out a couple of things and try to answer any questions you might have. This bill was not drafted with any particular state in mind, but if it was, I would think it would be Rhode Island, because what it does is allows out-of-state healthcare practitioners to come into Rhode Island during an emergency and provide volunteer services. And because we're so geographically small, the likelihood that if, for instance, a hurricane made a direct hit on Rhode Island would be pretty high that we would need out-of-state help. And obviously the pandemic has exposed the limits of every state's in-state resources. But this bill will give the state much more flexibility, and it provides for accountability of the volunteers who do come into the state. And for those reasons, we strongly support it. And again, I'll try to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Mr. Hemmendinger? No questions. Thank you very much. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 5622. Next, we'll move to Chairwoman Fogarty's legislation. She has three bills before the committee. House Bill 5887, 5888, and 5889, all having to do with the University of Rhode Island. Margot Cook is signed up to testify on...
Mr. Chairman, just
Yes.
for the record, I'm going to recuse myself from any debate on these bills, seeing as how my son-in-law is on the board.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Corvesi. We have Margot Cook signed up on behalf of the University of Rhode Island to testify in support of all three pieces of legislation. Good afternoon, Margot. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. We're here discussing Chairwoman Fogarty's three bills, 5887, 5888, and 5889. and you are signed up in support of all of them. Chairwoman Fogarty is in another committee meeting and unable to introduce the bill, so we were hoping you might be able to briefly introduce each bill and explain it.
Okay, thank you. So let me start with just an opening, and then should I just go through each bill, or should I stop in between?
You can go through each bill, that's fine, and then if you're available for questions afterwards that the committee might have, that would be great.
Okay, that sounds good. My name is Margot Cook, and I'm a proud URI alum, and I'm chair of the URI Board of Trustees. I wanted to say thank you for your consideration of these three important bills that the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees have requested this session. And even though Representative Fogarty isn't there, I'd like to thank Representative Fogarty for the sponsorship for this legislation, as well as Representative McGaugh, Representative Tansey, Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy for co-sponsoring these bills. I wanted to say that your commitment to our flagship university is greatly appreciated by the board, and we thank you for your support. And these are the three bills before the committee this afternoon that I'd like to provide testimony on. So H5887, as Representative Fogarty may have pointed out previously, modernizes the Open Meetings Act to address the unique characteristics of the URI Board of Trustees. So prior to COVID, President Dooley met with leaders of Common Cause, Rhode Island, and the Rhode Island ACLU to discuss this legislation and the importance of providing a remote meeting option for some of the members of the URI Board of Trustees. The URI Board is the only board in Rhode Island, to our knowledge, that includes members that reside out of state. This board structure is considered best practice in higher education governance across the country, and we're fortunate that the House and Senate enacted this important legislation in 2019. However, the high quorum requirements and travel challenges could limit an individual member's ability to fully participate in a meeting of the board or a committee of the board. So this legislation seeks to facilitate full participation of all board members of the board and allow a limited number of members to participate in a board or a committee meeting remotely. And as we've all experienced during the pandemic, remote meetings, when done well, can actually increase the public's access to the important business of a board and can provide members more flexibility to participate, which is what we've seen. I'm proud that the URI Board of Trustees has been able to adapt during these times, and we've held more than 30 meetings of the board or its committees since last April. All but 2 of these meetings were held virtually, and many have included opportunities for the public to participate in open public forums. The Rhode Island Open Meetings Act regarding electronic and remote participation has not been amended since 2007. And as we all know, there have been many advances in technology since 2007 that can support virtual meetings, and this past year has really shown us what is possible. I would ask the chair and members of the committee to consider passing this legislation to enact practices the board has already adapted to and hopes to continue when the pandemic is behind us all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Before we move on, I know I said I was going to have you do all 3 bills, but Representative Newberry has a question for you now. Would you mind taking it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Just a quick question. In normal times or absent some kind of emergency relating to the university, how often does the board or its subcommittees meet in a given year, typically?
We have 6 regular meetings, but then the committees can meet if they need to, and we've been meeting almost monthly because of things that we've had to address or issues that have come up. So that number that I quoted, it's been about a year, and between all of the committees and the board, we've met about 30 times. We've had about 30 meetings, rather. So I'd say it's probably on a normal run rate. It's going to be somewhere between 20 and 30 times.
Any further questions on 5887 for Ms. Cook? You can move on to 5888 now, if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. So 5888 updates the small purchasing thresholds that were established in Rhode Island law for the university and the Board of Trustees. As may have been noted, the current thresholds for small purchases in state law are very low, and they haven't been increased since 1999. So one of the important roles that the URI Board of Trustees has been undertaking is to support the streamlining of business processes at the university and ease any burdens for businesses interacting with the university. So this legislation would appropriately increase the small purchasing threshold at the university to more accurately reflect the cost of thousands of items and equipment a modern public research university purchases regularly. I think what's really important here is that the board would be required to adopt regulations governing these small purchases, and as a public body, the URI Board of Trustees has a fiduciary responsibility to oversee the budget and spending of the university on an annual basis. This legislation would also allow the board to adjust the thresholds annually in accordance with increases in the federal consumer price index. So the General Assembly wouldn't have to revisit these thresholds constantly to adjust for price increases in the marketplace. I also know that Vice President Abigail Ryder is signed up to testify, and she can provide a brief summary of what the small purchase thresholds are for other higher education institutions in the state and some of our competitors. I'd like to thank the chair and committee members for considering this legislation and welcome any questions, or I can defer to Vice President Ryder if there are technical questions.
Any questions for Ms. Cook on 5888? Okay, you can move on to 5889.
Okay, great. So 5889 makes important changes to the URI Board of Trustees membership statute to address some issues that have come up since the board started in early 2020. So given the importance of the board's business and the frequency of meetings, there have been concerns that a quorum of 13 members out of 17 members leaves very little room for any absences and could jeopardize important business of the university from moving forward. Lowering the quorum to 10 members still requires a majority of voting members to attend meetings and ensure the business of the university can move forward. As it relates to the board's current appointing authority, the board values the appointing authority that was granted in the statute, but we want to proactively address any perception that this authority does not reflect the separation of powers changes made to the Rhode Island Constitution. So specifically, Article 9, Section 5 of the Rhode Island Constitution gives the governor the sole appointing authority with the advice and consent of the Senate for public boards. As a board, we've adopted rules and regulations governing how we conduct business and how we as members conduct ourselves as ambassadors for our state's flagship research university. We welcome the opportunity to work with the governor to identify individuals willing to dedicate their time and energy towards supporting and promoting URI, and believe these proposed changes will accomplish those goals. I'd say finally, the current statute has a number of inconsistencies with the terms for board members, and this legislation clarifies those terms so all members serve for 3 years with the opportunity to be reappointed. I thank the chair and the committee members for considering this legislation, and I'd welcome any questions.
Any questions on 5889? Representative Agello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Margot Cook.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cook. On page 2, line 4, where the quorum required to be present for a decision is reduced to 10, you're not reducing the... I'm concerned that by reducing the number of board members present for a quorum from 13 to 10, but not increasing the percentage of the board or the number of the board members who need to constitute a majority. With 10 members present, only 6 out of the 17 board members would need to be voting in favor of something to move it forward. 6 6 is barely more than a third of the total board. That doesn't seem quite enough to make what might be a fairly momentous decision. Can you comment on that?
So, 10 members would have to be, so we still have to have a majority present. So I think what we're really asking for is that today 13 members have to be present for a quorum to be called. If 10 members are present, and we have actually found there have been a few instances in the course of meetings where we haven't been able to call a quorum because and some of it that is because there are people that live out of state, and even like with a virtual hearings have made it much easier. But my anxiety about that is that at some point we're not going to be able to call a quorum. And when we had our 2 in-person meetings, we actually had difficulty calling a quorum. So I think what we're trying to solve for is that in many cases, if we can't call that quorum, we won't be able to address the business of the university. And we've had that issue happen a couple of times, and that's where this proposal comes from.
A little follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Of course. Go ahead, Representative Geraldo.
I hear you on that, and wonder whether it would work to allow 10 to constitute a quorum, but when there were only 10 members present, if the majority present and voting required for action were stated to be 8, or a majority of the total members of the board, which is 8, I'd be more comfortable then. So if 6 wouldn't carry the day, but at least 8 would, then I could be comfortable.
So 10 voting members, but still have a majority of the board, whether they're virtual, if that passes, whether they're virtual or not, still have a majority of the board present.
That's what I'm suggesting, yes.
What happened? The regulations. Any further questions for Ms. Cook on 5889? We have other witnesses signed up on 5887 and 5888, Abigail Ryder and Steve Brown. Are either one of them available? Steve Brown is available. Good afternoon, Steve. Evan Shanley calling again. We're discussing House Bill 5887 from Chairwoman Fogarty, and you have the floor.
Thank you again, Chair and members of the committee. We realize that this bill predates the pandemic, but we really see it as a companion to the bill you heard earlier and that I testified on, the DBR bill dealing with remote open meetings. We recognize the special challenges that URI has in terms of out-of-state members and the need to get quorums together. We would simply urge that in light of the year's experience that we've now had with remote meetings, that the guardrails that I and others talked about on the DBR bill also should be considered before passing this legislation to make sure that public participation is as strong as can be and that we've learned from how things have operated this past year in order to make the bill better. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Brown? Next, we'll move to Abigail Ryder. She is signed up in support of House Bill 5888. Good evening, Ms. Ryder. We're here discussing House Bill 5888 from Chairwoman Fogarty, and you are signed up in support. You have the floor.
This past year.
Ms. Ryder? Or maybe we'll work on trying to get her. Chairwoman Fogarty has arrived. And Chairwoman, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about any of the 3 bills that you have on the calendar tonight.
Thank you, Chairman. I apologize for being a little late. Just have a couple of different things going on here, but certainly representing the university is an important thing since it's in my backyard. And so House Bill 5887, which modernizes the Open Meeting Act and allows the URI Board of Trustees to have a few members on the board attend meetings remotely, kind of along the lines of what we've had to do here at the State House, and we can understand that going on with the pandemic. A lot of other state universities have this allowance with their public bodies too, so I don't think they're really asking for too much with this. Also, URI has the House Bill 5888, which is updates the small purchasing thresholds established in Rhode Island law for the university and the Board of Trustees. Again, I know that there was another bill put in by Representative Edwards and Nardone, but again, that we're looking for when the university purchases is usually at a bigger, higher level, so they're just asking for some type of a relief with that from for their purchases. And then again, H5889, it's important for the changes for the URI Board of Trustees membership statute to address a few issues that have raised since the board started meeting this past 2020. Again, this is a new board, so it's some types of growing pains go along with that. So I know that my people have, from the university have testified. Again, I wish I was here to introduce the bills on time, just not enough time in the day, I guess. So if you have any questions for me, I'll be glad to try to answer them, but just a quick overview of the bills for the University of Rhode Island.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Chairwoman Fogarty?
Nope. Thank you very much.
Were we able to get Ms. Ryder? Is she available? Good afternoon, Ms. Ryder.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Fine.
We're here discussing House Bill 5888 from Chairwoman Fogarty, and you are signed up in support, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Chair Shanley and members of the committee. I'm Abigail Ryder, Vice President for Administration and Finance for the University of Rhode Island, and also available to answer questions today. With me is Tracy Angel, URI's Director of Purchasing. Thank you for your consideration of this important bill requested by URI this session. We also want to thank Representative Fogarty for sponsoring this. We're requesting that the university's thresholds for requiring a formal public bid process be raised, and that the University Rhode Island Board of Trustees have the authority to increase these thresholds by the increase in CPI from time to time. URI competes nationally and internationally for students, faculty, sponsored research, athletics, and much more, and serves as a magnet drawing intellectual and economic capital to Rhode Island. In order to compete effectively with other research universities across the country, the university needs to be nimble and efficient in its business processes. Title 37-222 currently establishes that construction purchases over $10,000 and all other purchases over $5,000 by state and public agencies must be made with a formal bid process, which can easily take from 30 to as much as 120 days if all runs smoothly. A public bid process is a sound practice designed to ensure that the state gets competitive pricing on its purchases. However, it involves a lot of work for the vendor, who often builds the considerable cost of preparing a formal bid into the pricing. Thus, while a good practice for an appropriately sized transaction requiring a formal bid process on purchases that are too small can achieve the opposite of the desired result because the effort of preparing a bid is disproportionate to the size of the transaction and the profit that the vendor could realize. For the university, it creates delays on routine purchases and discourages vendors from doing business with the university. This is inefficient and expensive in labor and time. On the construction side, given the high cost of construction in New England, it means that virtually every project, even the most mundane of repairs, has to go through the competitive bid process, causing extra costs and very long timelines to complete the work. Our peer land-grant institutions in the Northeast have the following thresholds for requiring a public bid. The University of New Hampshire sets it at $35,000. University of Connecticut, University of Maine, and the University of Massachusetts at $50,000. The University of Vermont at $100,000. Rutgers University and the University of Maryland at $200,000, and the University of Delaware at $250,000. Many research universities of comparable size, including Brown, Boston University, Colorado State, New York University, University of California, Davis, Yale, Harvard, MIT, and Princeton, have thresholds of $100,000 or higher for requiring a formal bid process. Finally, the federal uniform guidance sets the threshold for a public bid at $250,000 for expenditure of federal research grant dollars. For these reasons, we request your support of this proposed change so that the university can remain competitive with its peers. I thank the chair and the committee members for considering this legislation and welcome any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the witness? All right. That will conclude testimony on all three of Chairwoman Fogarty's bills. We will now move to Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson's bill, House Bill 5565, an act relating to criminal offenses, gambling, and lotteries. It authorizes nonprofit organizations to conduct gambling event fundraisers approved by the city or town in which the event is to be conducted and as authorized by the state police. Chairwoman Bella Wilkinson, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So I'd like you to start thinking, just to frame this bill, think about what we've all gone through in the last year. And even for those of us as elected officials who were not able to have a fundraiser for the campaign that we just finished this past fall, our nonprofit organizations are in dire straits in terms of fundraising. And having a casino night or a Monte Carlo night or a Las Vegas night, however you want to call it, is an excellent way for the nonprofits to be able to raise a large sum of money while having fun in the community. Now, as your description of the bill plainly states, Chairman, this is enabling legislation. So it enables the municipalities themselves to set the parameters around the event. The number of attendees, if they want a maximum number of people under the tent, whether or not there's going to be police details, if there'll be portable ATMs, the locations, the number of events annually, and also they have the ability to decide what they want to charge, if anything, for the permit in order to conduct this. So it's also a revenue stream within the municipality itself. I understand that there's some concern from the Lottery Commission with regards to having casino nights, and I know that at one time, I believe that we had them in Rhode Island. I don't remember when or why it was eliminated, but I can tell you, I can remember growing up in the 60s where a lot of the church bazaars would have a separate tent for their casino events. They'd have the wheel that they could spin, or they might throw dice or something of that effect. It was wholesome, it was good, clean fun. Typically, they had someone at the door to make sure that the guests were of the appropriate age, and they may or may not have a beer tent that was in proximity to it. But that's, again, something else that the municipality would have full control over. That's it in a nutshell.
Any questions for Chair Bella Wilkinson? Representative Newberry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I completely support this. My wife was president of a nonprofit about 15 years ago, and there was a casino night. What I don't remember is if we did it in Massachusetts. I thought this was legal is my point anyway. So maybe it wasn't at some point, maybe the lottery. I don't know what happened, but since it can be done over the border, or it was done here, I think, yeah, this is a no-brainer.
Thank you very much, Representative.
Representative Knight.
I also think it's a good bill, but I'm reading the lottery's letter, and I respect their lawyers, but they're wondering if it's an expansion of gambling, and I don't know who's going to sue, right? Pass the bill, see what happens.
Chairman.
That's it. We have Representative Kennedy, Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy.
Thank you. So this all came about a number of years ago when there was talk about a full-scale casino in the state of Rhode Island. And for the members who do not recall this, at that time, the Narragansett Indian tribe was talking about building a full-scale casino with high-stakes bingo. And as an effort to prevent that from happening, the General Assembly basically passed legislation to outlaw these particular types of games of chance that were being conducted not only by the local churches, but by other charitable organizations in the state of Rhode Island. So, you know, I think back to the days at my Catholic church in Ashaway where it used to be such a great team building thing. Everybody got together, put up the booths, you know, people came and had their chowder and clam cakes, and they played the games of chance. And then it got outlawed. And it's been outlawed ever since. But that was the genesis as to why this happened.
Thank you, Speaker Pro Tem Kennedy. Any additional questions or comments? Okay. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 5565 from Chairwoman Vella.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you. Next, we will move to House Bill 5893, sponsored by myself. We have Thomas Weil, who is signed up in support to testify. And while we try and get Mr. Weil on the phone, I will give an introduction. This would allow state departments and agencies to implement electronic filing of applications for licenses, permits, registrations, certificates, and functions by allowing a vendor to withhold a commission for implementing the system for electronic filing. So it would save us the upfront cost of buying a computer system that costs $300 or $400 million in exchange for a per transaction fee that would be allowed by a company to collect it. And it would be at the discretion of the State Department choosing to utilize it. Is Mr. Weil available? Good afternoon, Mr. Weil. Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're here discussing House Bill 5893, and you are signed up in support. You have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Shanley, and thank you for sponsoring the bill as well as Representatives Craven and Amore. I know you've got a very full calendar, so I'll be brief. I did supply some written testimony with more detail, but again, my name is Tom Weil. I'm the General Manager of NIC Rhode Island. Our company offers over 80 online government services to the state of Rhode Island and accommodates payment processing for probably a dozen more. If you've renewed your driver's license online, you filed a financial disclosure form with the Ethics Commission, or you paid for a filing with our Secretary of State, you've used one of our existing services. In all but a handful of cases, our work is not funded with appropriated tax dollars. Instead, we add a fee on top of the statutory fee that is paid by the user. And that fee supports both the credit card expense we incur for processing the transaction and funds our business so we can grow. And an example, if you renewed your driver's license online, if you went there or you went in person, you'd pay $62.50. If you make that same transaction online through ri.gov, you're going to pay that $62.50 plus another $2.50 fee. And that's what our company is permitted by our contract to retain for that service. So the goal of this legislation is just to offer an option to various agencies like the DMV and others where rather than having to add a fee on top of the transaction, we could retain a portion of the statutory fee. And again, I think the goal is probably obvious. It's to make the cost the same, whether that constituent goes in person or does their transactions through the mail or does it through one of our online services. And I think that's especially important, you know, given the fact that government right now is looking to minimize in-person transactions wherever possible, and that option would not act, the ability of, or the fact that we're adding a fee doesn't become a disincentive to users who might use an online service.
Thank you. Any questions for... Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Weil? No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That will conclude testimony in House Bill 5893. We'll next move to Representative Baginski's bill, 5892, an act relating to health and safety, state building code, administration, and enforcement. You're here. Do you want to present from there?
Yes. I'm submitting this bill on the advice and suggestion of a very well-educated and well-informed and well-intended constituent of mine who brought this issue to my attention. The intent of the legislation is to streamline the government process surrounding adopting new electrical building codes. Those codes are updated about every 3 years on the federal level, and they represent updates to the scope of practice, rules, products that electricians and electrical inspectors can use in their line of work. What happens now in Rhode Island is that the legislature has a role in the process of adopting new code updates. So when updates come down from the federal level, they make a pit stop in the legislature to be reviewed and authorized before they are disseminated to DBR for implementation. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on building codes, and I'm not trying to point any fingers, but I'm told that the legislature is typically 1 to 2 years behind in adopting code updates. So, for example, a new set of electrical codes were issued at the federal level in 2020. Here we are in 2021 with no plan to review, implement, or disseminate them to DBR so they can be acted upon. The last thing I'd like to say is that I did not know this at the time I submitted the bill, but I was pleased to learn by reading John Marion's written testimony submitted today that the statute as it is written may actually violate some separation of powers acts that were passed in 2004. I can't claim to completely understand it, and I'd like to look into this more, but according to Mr. Marion, the legislature in this instance is acting as an executive body and can't do that. So I'd ask technical questions about building codes be addressed to my constituent Lou, who's prepared to testify, but I'm happy to answer any questions about implementation or the process.
Any questions for Representative Baginski? No, okay. Do we have Mr. Petrucci available? Good afternoon, Mr. Petrucci. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're here discussing Representative Baginski's bill, House Bill 5892, and you are signed up in support, and she's promised that you'll answer all of our questions.
All the tough ones.
Yes, I will.
So you have the floor, sir.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's Lou Petrucci. I am here testifying in support of this 5892. I'm a retired electrical contractor. I'm a electrical inspector. I'm an instructor, so I'm heavily involved with the trade and in our codes. This bill, like my representative just described, will remove that one step where government gets involved with the adoption of it. We have the building commission and their subcommittee who reviews the 700 plus changes and additions to the electrical code alone, and they do a great job. They do a very good job of it. But then we go through this bogged down process of the regulatory reform getting involved, and now also the legislators. There's never been an issue. The legislators is just one more step that they make sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But it just adds more time to the adoption. Like it was said, here we are, 2021, and our 20 code has not been adopted yet.
and there are many, many changes. And they're already working on the 2023 code. Our code goes every 3 years. So this would remove that step that I found out last year from John Marion that it's been something that's been found that the separation of state comes into play with this. That's all I got. I know we got a short time, and anybody's got any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Petrucci? No questions. You got off easy.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That will conclude testimony on House Bill 5892.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative.
I have a question for legal counsel.
Okay.
And it's a drafting question. On page 1, line 6, the committee is empowered to adopt codes and standards subject to approval pursuant to subsection C. Subsection C looks to me like the part of this law that we're deleting. Or am I wrong?
No, you're correct. That's correct.
So we would want to delete.
So we'd have to change that language. Thank you for pointing that out to me.
Thank you.
Thank you, legal counsel. Any further questions? Okay, next we're going to move on to Representative McGaw's bill, House Bill 5624. This is an act relating to elections and primaries. It requires that on all primaries, the candidate's name would be listed in an order chosen by lot under the direction of the Secretary of State. Is Representative McGaw available?
I am here.
You are here. It's hard to tell who's there. Welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you.
If you go ahead.
Thank you. I introduced this bill when I was running for office. It was surprising to me how many people were confused by the little that we see on the ballot. And people, we had a lot of discussions about district committees during this past election. And so as a result of that, a lot of conversations about how names appear on the ballot and why there's that little star next to their name. And I think it was very eye-opening to a lot of the people that I talked to when we were having those conversations about the process of the district committee, about the fact that they get that endorsement star next to their name, how that happens, and the fact that they get priority placement on the ballot. And people were confused by it. They were concerned by it, and I really feel like it would provide a much more evenly transparent level of ballot placement if we could do a lottery placement like we do in the general election, where the state Secretary of State draws a lottery to determine how the names are going to appear in the ballot. This bill would also remove that asterisk, so removing any bias from any particular candidate on the ballot, so that candidates would be responsible for presenting their case and proving to the voters that they are a worthy opponent without that designation of a star.
Any questions for Representative McGaw? Thank you very much. There is one witness signed up in support, and that is Mr. Randall Rose. Is Mr. Rose available? He can't be reached? Okay. Well, that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5624. The next bill we're going to move to is Representative Roberts' Bill 5496. Representative Roberts is unable to be here today. So this bill will more than likely have another hearing. It's an act relating to health and safety, vital records. It requires notification of the name and address of the deceased on a death certificate with the Office of Secretary of State and the chairperson of the Board of Canvassers for the purpose of removal from the rolls of registered voters. So there are no witnesses signed up for today, and again, this bill will likely have another hearing in the future as long as the sponsor submits a request. So that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5496. Next move. Oh, you have Randall on the line. Okay. We'll go back and we'll take Mr. Rose's testimony on 5624 then. Mr. Rose, how are you? We're here discussing House Bill 5624. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, sir. And I will be quite brief. It's documented that voters have a tendency to vote for whichever candidate is listed first on the ballot, it's just not right to give one candidate a favored position in the ballot because the party committee has endorsed them. Voters should have a free choice, and this bill does put the candidates in random order on the ballot, which is how it should be. I don't think candidates should be put in a favorable condition just because some local party committee that nobody has heard of happened to vote to endorse them. The decisions of party committees are often quite strange, and they don't represent the voters because most voters just don't know who is on those party committees. So I think it's better just to put everybody on a level playing field for the primary election and allow them to be just listed equally on the ballot in random order. So I support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Rose? Thank you, Mr. Rose. Next, we are moving to House Bill 5562 from Representative Perez. This bill would prohibit the Department of Motor Vehicles from placing on a motorist driving record a traffic violation which fine has been paid no longer than 30 days after its issuance. This procedure would only be utilized twice per year. There are no witnesses signed up on this bill, so that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5562. Next, we will move to Representative Norway's bill, House Bill 5623. Representative Norway is at another committee. This bill would allow occupancy of an accessory dwelling unit of a single-family dwelling by a family member, generally, and allows municipalities to establish standards for the construction of accessory dwelling units. There are no witnesses signed up on this legislation as well, so that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5623. And we will now move to the bill that has the most witnesses in attention tonight from Chairwoman Diaz, House Bill 5740. This is an act relating to state affairs and government, restrictive housing at Correctional Facilities Act. It establishes conditions, policies, and procedures for the restrictive housing of inmates at correctional facilities in Rhode Island with the least restrictive conditions possible. Chairwoman Diaz, welcome. You have the floor. Thank you for being patient.
Thank you, Chairman, and every members of the House Committee on State Government and Elections. I'm happy to camping with you tonight. I should be resting, but the duty of being a state representative is so important. And talking about duty, I feel responsible and obligated to represent many people who are facing in unconditional life situation. And unfortunately, when people have to face time incarcerated, they facing the most unprecedented situation as a human. In House Bill 5740, we address some of those experiences, and I have people expert in the testimony. I try to be very brief, but I want to get your attention and few talking points of the legislation that I wanted to bring you to up to my feelings and my experience to see how people facing those difficult times. So in Rhode Island, we have, we have minimum, medium, and maximum security facility. And we have, in high security centers. In the high security, we have 85 prisoners, most of them in extended indefinite solitary confinement. They are spending 22 to 24 hours a day inside a room of 8 by 10-foot cell. Imagine you be in the room with no light, sunlight or anything for 22 to 25. I'm getting crazy when I'm in my house 6 hours, imagine. So this is out of line with modern correctional practice. Rhode Island is so behind. Solitary confinement hurts the mental and physical health of those subject to it, increases violence incidents within prisoners, and is associated with significantly increased or risk of death after they've been released. One of the most important part of our research for this bill was to find out that Rhode Island spent, for those 85 inmates that I just mentioned, Rhode Island spent $199,000 a year, which is 12 times more than what Rhode Island spent for public school students. So we paying a lot of money to get people suffering, isolated, and learn nothing from the experience, while we have a crumpy, falling apart school system that we don't hesitate to put the money that we need. But that is not the point today. Also, we have correctional officers spending up to 32 hours of working because the condition, the facility structure don't allow to reduce the numbers of correctional officers. So the state is those correctional, when they are forced into work, they gain on overtime between $200,000 to $300,000 a year, because those inmates need to have the security to avoid violence and to avoid so many other things that can put in jeopardy the correctional officers and also the inmates. The bill in front of you is trying to address the solitary confinement because we feel and think it's inhumane. And nobody deserves it to be treated the way it is. The disciplinary confinement is even worse, and it's part of what we're addressing in this bill tonight. We have two directors, previous directors of the CI Correctional Department that state that Rhode Island has the most outdated facility in the country, one of the most outdated facility. And if we compare Rhode Island to other states, we have 12 states pass legislation that reform solitary confinement. And we have Colorado, New Jersey, New Mexico, Idaho, Nebraska, New York State, and Cook County, Illinois, and other states that are saving money to invest in other needs that the state residents need. Helping those resources to funding program that helping inmates to rehab in order to reincorporate it to society. So the bill in front of you is a bill of restoring safety for inmates, safety for correctional officers, and reinvesting the extra money we putting into correctional facility when we couldn't put in a school, we can put in other area. Another important aspect of this legislation is that we need to be sure to have the resources to have housing and the programs and support those individuals need when they get out of jail. So you have in front of you is a great bill, it saves money, It's good for Rhode Island, for those who are unfortunate, serving time, and for those who live out of the jail, because when they get out, part of them becoming homeless with mental health issues. So it's our responsibility to see how we can address that tonight and motivate others legislators as well. 10 signed already to support and to move and pass this legislation. So thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Chairwoman Diaz? No questions. Okay, for members of the public watching, and if you're watching waiting to testify, there are 35 people that have signed up to testify. 33 of those 35 people are signed up in support of the bill. So I would ask you to limit your testimony to testimony that hasn't been already repeated. So if you have a personal story, try and keep it brief because we only have this room until 7 o'clock. So we've asked people to stay to 2 minutes. If you can go shorter than 2 minutes, please do that. With that in mind, let's begin with Natalia Friedlander from the Rhode Island Center for perhaps Justice. It's cut off.
Signed up in support of the bill.
Ms. Friedlander, are you available?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we're here discussing Chairwoman Diaz's bill, House Bill 5740, and you have the floor, and we just ask that you'd be as efficient with your testimony as possible.
Yes, of course. And thank you, Chairman Shanley and the committee for the opportunity to testify in support of the Restrictive Housing Act and Representative Diaz for sponsoring this important piece of legislation. My name is Natalia Friedlander. I'm an attorney at the Rhode Island Center for Justice, and we urge you to advance this bill, which would bring our state in line with correctional best practices and public health recommendations. Like Representative Diaz said, the Rhode Island Department of Corrections keeps dozens of people in confinement, where they spend 22 to 24 hours a day in their prison cells with limited access to family support, current events, programming, and other services. Some suffer from horrible and debilitating mental illness, which is made worse through their time in solitary. And this bill is based on guidelines from the Department of Justice, the American Correctional Association, and best practices from other states. It covers two main areas. The first is disciplinary confinement, which is in response to a rule violation. And the second is administrative confinement, which is indefinite and not necessarily in response to a specific infraction. So I'll start by briefly covering the disciplinary side of it. And under current RIDOC policy, anyone in disciplinary confinement gets 1 hour out of cell time each weekday, and no out of cell time on weekends and holidays. 1 hour in practice often means 45 minutes. So someone who comes back from 45 minutes of out of cell time on Friday afternoon might not leave their cell again until Tuesday afternoon on a long weekend. Prisoners in disciplinary confinement don't get any in-person visits, even in non-COVID times. They get a maximum of 1 10-minute phone call to immediate family every 38 days, sometimes not even that. None of them get radios, no MP3 players, music players, no TVs, and many are denied even access to newspapers and magazines. Some don't have mirrors in their cells, there's nothing to do or look at. They pace back and forth, they yell, they start seeing things, and they tell me they feel like they're losing their minds. There are currently several federal lawsuits and 2 large-scale federal class actions against the Department of Corrections for its disciplinary confinement practices, including one on behalf of prisoners with serious mental illness who are, among other things, placed in solitary confinement for attempting suicide and for other symptoms of mental illness. This bill would cap disciplinary confinement sentences at 15 days, which is in line with the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules on Treatment of Prisoners, also known as the Nelson Mandela Rules from 2015. And it's the same daily cap that states like Delaware and Colorado have put in place. It would also limit disciplinary confinement to only offenses that involve violence or escape. And this language of the bill is lifted verbatim from U.S. Department of Justice guidelines that were published in 2016. This doesn't mean that there are no sanctions for rule breaking, and there are plenty of tools at the DOC's disposal to enforce its code of conduct. But it says that solitary confinement should be reserved for truly the worst transgressions. The bill would exclude most vulnerable populations, like those with serious mental illness and developmental disabilities, and pregnant women from being placed in this really restricted setting. Under the bill, if someone needs additional time and support to transition back to general population, the DOC could put them in transitional housing for another 30 days, but it would have to provide them with programming and services to get at the root cause of behavior. And the goal here really is behavior change. We know that long sentences in solitary don't improve behavior, and we know that programming and maintenance of family ties do. The second part of it would institute a number of reforms to administrative confinement, which is long-term indefinite segregation at Rhode Island Supermax prison. And like Representative Diaz said, just like disciplinary segregation, prisoners in administrative confinement get 1 hour out of cell every weekday, Monday to Friday. They can spend months and even years in administrative confinement. I believe there's currently prisoners in the Supermax prison who've been there for 4 or 5 years, maybe even more.
Thank you for your testimony. We're going to move on now. Thank you, Mrs. Friedlander.
Thank you.
Next, we have Joe Benton. Hello, Mr. Benton?
Yes.
Hi. You are here to testify on House Bill 5740. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to take a minute to thank Chairman Shanley and the honorable members of the board for affording me this opportunity to speak. But I want to talk briefly about being in segregation for extended periods of time. I spent some time there at the ACI, and as a result of my stay in segregation, I still go to therapy, and I think that'll be ongoing for quite a while. Also, my father and my son died while I was locked up, and I had no way to vent or any way to resolve that conflict that was going on inside me, the pain and anguish that I was experiencing. And so I just want to just bring that to somebody's attention so that they'll understand how difficult it can be and how destructive. And many people that I know of who's had a similar experience, I see them on Broad Street, and please believe me, they need serious therapy. And perhaps until they get that, they'll wind up going back. And so in conclusion, I want to thank Representative Diaz and the other honorable members for affording me this opportunity.
Thank you.
And thank you again.
Any members have any questions for Mr. Benton? No? Okay, we'll move on to Brandon Robinson. Hello, Mr. Robinson?
No, they have to get back in the contract.
Hello? Oh, you have to turn down your sound here. We're having difficulty hearing you.
What is that?
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you may go ahead with your testimony on House Bill 5740.
All right, 1 second. 1 second. So,
Okay.
back to the track. Call Verizon. You got to call Verizon. Yes. Okay, so good evening, Chairman Stanley, and honorable members of the committee. So my name is Brandon Robinson, and I grew up on the south side of Providence, a neighborhood that is notoriously hyper-policed and under-resourced. Throughout my childhood in the 1980s, I witnessed the peak of the crack cocaine epidemic, and I saw many families being torn apart by it. And also the resulting mass incarceration. I witnessed many family members incarcerated and locked up for various different things. It even led to the death within my family when I was only 15 years old. That took a serious mental toll on me. When I was old enough to go to college, I started attending Johnson Wales University, but my studies were interrupted by a period of incarceration myself. Something I recognized to be a result of the circumstance I grew up in. The culture in my neighborhood and the way mass incarceration affected my community was like very detrimental. During my time of incarceration, I spent a period of 8 months in solitary confinement, confined to a tiny cell for 23 hours a day, every day. No TV, just the radio and some books. When I was in the facilities where programming and education was offered, I used those chances to earn my barber's license and associate's degree. And those things made me at least feel hopeful about what life had after incarceration. In segregation, there was very little access to educational, behavioral, or emotional wellness programming. And I could see that it was severely needed in that housing setting, especially for those who've been in there for long periods of time. I saw people really struggle to stay sane. People who would do awful things to themselves just to get medical attention and human interaction. And just so you know, everybody's in a single cell there, so there's no other person there with you. I witnessed someone even, just doing desperate things to get attention. Sometimes human interaction with correctional officers was abusive and only made things worse. While in one building of the HI in particular, I worked as a janitor, and so I spent a lot of time cleaning throughout the facility. There was one spot, a spot that was out of sight of the cameras, where the guards took people they were upset with, and you could hear screams and the smell of tear gas coming from there. When I think about my time in solitary confinement and I recollect all the things I witnessed, I realize that I am an outlier in the sense of how I have still managed to forge a successful career in the field of marketing, while also continuing my education while transitioning back into society. Many of the people impacted by solitary confinement really struggle to find stability afterwards because such an experience and the mental health impacts of being treated in such inhumane ways really stays with me. My time there slowed down the whole trajectory of my life, but I am lucky to survive and made it up. Because lots of people remain bound to return to the system and return to solitary confinement and perpetually struggle.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Any members of the committee have any questions? No? Thank you for your testimony. Next, we'll go to Miranda Grundy. Miss Grundy?
Hi.
Hi.
Good evening, Chairman Shanley.
You can begin your testimony on House Bill 5740.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Chairman Shanley and honorable members of the committee. My name is Miranda. I'm 22 years old. I grew up in Smithfield, Rhode Island, and I'm testifying in support of H5740. I've spent the last 8 months of my life organizing around political advocacy initiatives in the world of criminal justice here in Rhode Island, and particularly this issue. 8 months is not very long compared to many of the devoted advocates you will hear from today, but in this short time, I've deeply internalized the painful stories of so many people impacted by this issue. Just the secondhand knowledge of the human rights abuses that take place in the ACI has deeply moved me and forced a kind of emotional maturity upon me in ways that I never expected. I've spent months building relationships with people that this state labels the worst of the worst, and these relationships have turned into some of the strongest bonds in my life, the biggest source of lessons and the driver of my personal development. What I want to emphasize most is the underlying humanity that exists within each and every person who would be affected by the passage of this bill. Prisoners are just people like me and you, people who often come from complicated life circumstances, often people whose entire lives have been denied, have been defined by their biggest mistakes, and sometimes people who weren't even guilty of a crime in the first place. Time after time, I have found these people just want to be treated with dignity, want the room to think and feel for themselves, and want access to the resources they need to have another chance. The use of solitary confinement is unnecessary, an unnecessary compounding barrier. For some, it means a lifetime of instability. I urge you to vote in support of this bill because so many within our community have come together to imagine a new reality in a setting that, as it stands, extinguishes the desire for life. Your vote in support of a bill like this is literally life-saving, and I hope this fact is known and felt here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grundy. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, we'll go on to Nick Horton.
Good afternoon, Nick. Welcome to the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing House Bill 5740. and you have the floor. We ask that you be as brief as possible. We are limited with time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Shanley, Committee, and Representative Diaz. I'm the co-director of Open Doors, where I've worked for the last 17 years. In that time, I've worked within the ACI as a teacher and an administrator. I've run a halfway house. I've even lived in a halfway house as a staff member. As a member of the Closed High Security Coalition, our agency is dedicated above all else to community safety. And we know from experience the various challenges throughout the entire prison and law enforcement system. The changes in this bill will make the DOC run better. They are practical and achievable standards for humane correctional practice, broadly embraced nationally by experts. Over the past several months, I've spoken to multiple current and former Rhode Island Department of Corrections staff that support these changes, including administrators, service providers, and even correctional officers. I want to draw your attention to written testimony that was provided to you by the Director, Facility Operations, and the Clinical Director at the North Dakota Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Starting in 2016, North Dakota instituted many of the best practices in this legislation. As a result, they reduced their rate of admission into segregation by 90%. Their data shows that this has not resulted in any increase in violence against staff or other people in prison. And in their medium security prison, rates of violence have actually dropped. They worked with Amend, an organization that provides technical assistance to correctional departments across the country, which also submitted testimony to you. And in their letter, North Dakota indicates that they have seen benefits not just to the people incarcerated, but to the staff as well. They're confident that, quote, exposing people to long periods of social isolation, idleness, and other harmful conditions, regardless of the terminology used to label a housing unit, breeds more violence and harm than it prevents. I emphasize these are words from the administrators of the Department of Corrections. I want to end by mentioning that about a month ago, myself and another member of our coalition met with Mr. Fruccio, who I'm sure you will hear from later to represent the Brotherhood. I've worked with him for many years. I have a great deal of respect for the difficult work that he and other correctional officers do. And I realize that there is a great deal of disagreement between many of the people testifying today around how the ACI has been run. The disagreement between many of the people that have been inside the ACI and many of the officers that work there. But after talking to Mr. Fruccio and to many of the people that have been in segregation, I believe there's a great deal of common ground. We all want the ACI to operate safely. Mr. Fruccio emphasized that he does not disagree with the idea of providing more rehabilitative opportunities to people in segregation. That is what this bill does, and I look forward to working with all of you to figure out how to make sure we require safe and humane conditions for everyone at the ACI, no matter who they are.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Horton. Any questions from members of the committee? Next, we have Penny Huan. Good afternoon, Penny. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor to testify. Please try and limit your testimony to less than 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my name is Penny Wan, and I am addressing the Senate, the state, whoever is involved in reformation for prison, solitude. We call it the chute. We call it the hole, which is a very bad term because when you say the hole, everything comes to your mind. I just want to say that I was in prison for 11 years, and I came in there pregnant. I was in the hole for 21 days during my pregnancy. Women are hollering in there. I just know from experience that it was one of the worst times in my life. My prison term wasn't the worst. It was just something to remind you of something you need to make better. I know that being in the hole is where you are denied mail call, wanting to speak to your family, visits. We get lesser portions of food. And if you're pregnant or you have mental issues, you are left. You're one of the bottom. I know that for a fact that I've heard women scream and are there on suicide watch because somebody said something. It's an awful place, and it just makes you want to be somebody worse of who you are. It takes away of who you want to be, or it doesn't. There's no reformation in that. I am a testimony today. I'm a survivor. I'm still struggling today, but it's a good struggle. And I just want to say that we need some more attention towards inmates that are in the chute, the hole, as we call it. I can't call it solitary confinement because it's more than that. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Penny. Any questions for the witness? Thank you again. Next, we'll move to Ronnie Walker. Good afternoon. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. We ask that you limit your testimony to 2 minutes, please. Welcome.
Welcome. My name is Ronnie Walker, and I experienced a lot of seg time while I was incarcerated. And during this seg time, it was a lot of sleep deprivation, hunger, punishment on top of punishment. You couldn't, if you wanted to save a sandwich, for later on, you'd have to roll it up in toilet paper and put it underneath your mattress and hope that they don't come in for a shakedown and give you another infraction, plus having food in your room. Segregation, I think, is a very dwindling mental state that'll bring you and break the average person straight to the ground. I don't wish that on nobody, and the lesser seg time you can pass up, the better. And I agree with this whole legislation as trying to pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for calling in, Mr. Walker. Any questions from the committee for Mr. Walker? Thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next witness we have is Alex Snow. Okay. We'll next move to Christopher Barrage. Good afternoon, Christopher. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government. We're discussing House Bill 5740, and you've signed up to testify. You have the floor, and we ask that you limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less, please. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And welcome.
Yes. Thank you. I'm glad to be here today and to talk about this. The stuff that the conditions and segregation is just, it's a little outrageous. I mean, they call it booking, and they book people and they give them extra time for stuff like talking through the doors. And it's like you're in a segregated place where you're not able to speak to anybody, and it makes you actually lose sanity. And I mean, like, I ended up going in there to segregation for 10 days, and I ended up staying in there for 6 months in intake. And within that 6 months, I lost a whole lot of sanity. And I mean, I just really want to see this bill changed, where we're only really able to do like 15 days at a time, maybe. So I mean, that's what I really wanted to put on this legislator, and like talk to the people and just explain to them it's the living conditions down there are dirty. They really don't give you time for showers. There's a lot of different other points that people will, I guess they will speak on, but that's just the points I really wanted to speak on tonight.
Thank you very much for calling in. Are there any questions of the committee for Mr. Barrage? No questions. Thank you again for calling in.
All right, thank you. Have a nice night.
You too. Next witness that we have is Mark Gonsalves. Is Mr. Gonzalez available? Good evening, Mark. This is Evan Shanley calling from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. We just ask that you limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less, please. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, this bill, oh God, sorry, caught me off guard. But, while incarcerated, my last time, it was for court fines, and they just, for segregation and how they throw people in cells 23 hours a day, and with no contact for your family and friends, with easy access, visitation, or even just normal daily necessities that you would need as far as cosmetics or healthcare products, issues, things. My medications, I wasn't given my medications that I had been on for years. Being that, I had nothing in there, I deal with some mental health issues, and just having to read ingredients on different cosmetics and just a shampoo bottle just to try to keep a sane mind while I was in there. It was very, hard on my mental health and my mental state. The food, the fact that they just throw you in the cell with some other inmates that may be in there for different reasons for disciplinary, but the long hours being locked in those cells just is not healthy in any kind of way, whether it's physically healthy or mentally healthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. I appreciate you calling in and sharing your testimony with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we will move to Sarah Martino. Is Ms. Martino available? Good afternoon, Ms. Martino. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks to the committee for your time tonight. As you know, I'm Sarah Martino. I'm here representing the Center for Health and Justice Transformation, speaking in support of this bill. We look at the criminal justice system with a public health lens, and for that reason, I wanted to briefly review the significant detrimental health impacts of solitary confinement, as there is a great deal of research evidence on this topic. So perhaps intuitive to many of us, prolonged isolation in restrictive housing has in the research been linked to multiple mental health impacts, including increased anxiety, depression, paranoia, aggression, panic, insomnia, and hallucinations. People in solitary confinement have higher rates of self-harming behavior, as well as higher rates of suicide and suicidal ideation than their peers in general population. They also have higher rates of post-traumatic stress disorder diagnoses. While less research has been conducted on the physical health impacts of solitary, studies looking at incarcerated patients in Supermax prisons have found that those patients have higher rates of hypertension than those in regular maximum security settings, which likely has longer-term impacts on their cardiac health. and patients in Supermax prisons cite many other chronic medical conditions related to their conditions of confinement. A growing body of neuroscience research shows that long-term isolation likely alters the brain and could have long-term effects on cognitive functioning. Finally, those who spend time in restrictive housing have higher post-release mortality rates, particularly from suicide, than those who do not. So people who spend time in restrictive housing are in fact 24% more likely to die in their first year of release from incarceration. The longer the time spent in solitary is associated with, of course, a greater mortality rate. I think it's worth noting, just to conclude, that the evidence of these devastating impacts is substantial enough that the National Commission on Correctional Healthcare adopted a position in 2016 that greater than 15 consecutive days of solitary confinement is cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment and harmful to an individual's health, and that solitary confinement over 15 days should be eliminated as a means of punishment. The NCCHC is an independent nonprofit governed by a board of correctional healthcare professionals with support from every major medical association in the United States. We should absolutely bring Rhode Island in line with this reasonable guidance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Martino? Thank you. Next, we will move to Tyrone Scholl. Is Mr. Scholl available? Good evening, Mr. Scholl. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you again and welcome.
Thank you, and I appreciate what you guys are doing. I want to say it like this. I started going to prison when I was 17 years old. As I was in prison, I caught check time for stuff that I wasn't even involved with half the time. But in the process of me going to in segregation, the officers that are down there working in this and that, they're humiliating you, they're downgrading you, they're disrespecting you. They have no morals or respect for themselves, so they ain't giving you none just as well. But again, I went to segregation and I went to high side. When it got to me going to high side, I was like the 8th person, maybe the 9th person in that building in 81 when it first opened up. And when we got there, we went through more hell than a little bit because they were treating us like dogs. They didn't care about us. It was all a whole new building, so the officers were doing whatever they felt they wanted to do, and they were being disrespected. Then when they did let us out in the population in the building, we go in a block. There's no heat. There's the showers. They run the showers cold at all times. They just you end up losing your mind, going crazy. And in the process of being there, when we first got there, in the high security, the walls are all separated because they built it on a swamp area. The building wasn't even settled in yet when they opened it up. And the building stayed cold. During the winter, you freeze. During the summer, you sweat. They treat you with no type of disrespect at all. You don't get your mail. Stores, you see a store for 2-3 weeks at a time. Your personal hygiene, they're all crazy. They treat you like a dog in that place, and they don't care nothing about you. You're there. Like me personally, I was doing lifeline installment plan, and that's why now I'm getting myself in order. I got my education in prison when I was in population, and now I'm doing what needs to be done to do it right because I feel I'm not trying to be doing the things I was doing, lifeline installment plan, in and out, in and out, in and out. It didn't make no sense. I was hurting myself. They may have had my body, but they wasn't getting my mind. That's why I went to school and got my education. And here I am today, living a good life, doing what needs to be done, making it right.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Scholl. Any questions from members of the committee? Next, we move to Jackie Kennedy. Is Ms. Kennedy available? Good evening, Ms. Kennedy. We're discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Shanley and all the honorable members of the committee. My name is Jackie Kennedy, and I am an individual who was formerly incarcerated. And I'm here just to take a few minutes of your time because I'm in support of Bill 5740. when you are placed in solitary confinement for a large amount of time, it affects everything, physically, emotionally, mentally. Physically, you're confined to a small space. So your body is not getting the exercise, your muscles are not getting the movement that it requires to be limber. Mentally, I personally can tell you, after my incarceration, I suffered from depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Years of therapy have brought me to the point where I can now speak my story. When you're isolated, one of the things that you forget is social behavior. So you spend months upon months by yourself in a room, and then it's very difficult for you to remember just how to interact with other human beings on any level. I know that's something that I worked on, just to be able to be around other people. The other thing that I wanted to point out is, when you're in the hole, and that's what most people who have been incarcerated call segregation, it is just that. It's the bottom of the earth. You are made to feel like you're less than human. The guards use you as target practice because they can treat you any way they want to. I think there is definitely has to be a better alternative. I personally was in segregation for 253 days, and like I said, it's taken years of therapy for me to be what I consider feeling normal. I'm in support of this, and there just has to be a better way. We as society have got to come up with a better way than locking people in a small room for 23 hours a day for months and months with no interaction. That's it. I thank you all for your time and your consideration. Have a great evening and stay safe.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy, very much for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Next, we will move to Tara Dorsey. Is Ms. Dorsey available? Good evening, Ms. Dorsey. We're discussing House Bill 5740. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi. Again, my name is Tara Dorsey. Thank you for welcoming me. So I was released in 2014 after a 12-year sentence in the ACI, Women's ACI. During my time, right now I'm working for the Lifespan Corporation. I work for the Transitions Clinic, helping men and women leaving prison. Before that, I worked for the Anchor Recovery Community Center, and I ran a group called the Homecomers Group. The Homecomers Group was a safe space for men and women who left the prison and re-entered society to speak about what they was going through. It was just a support group for us all. But to speak upon my time in isolation and segregation, I was wondering what I was going to speak about. Two things I just want to mention. First thing is, I spent a year in segregation altogether. I was there for 6 months at one time and was out for 2 months and went back for another 6 months. During my time, I went for 15 days. I got booked, and it was for 15 days. That 15 days ended up to be 6 months. I would get booked for things like talking through the window, because there was like a door, like a little screen door, and across that was another inmate that was in seg. So, I wanted human contact. I wanted to be able to speak to somebody. It's me, a bed, a pen, and a paper, and a book for 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, I tried hard not to speak through the window, but I did. And when I did, I got booked for another 15 days, and I did booked for another 10 days, Another time, I got booked for 20 days for having food in my room. Our last meal, we had our first meal at 7:30. Our last meal was at 3:30, sometimes 4 o'clock in the evening. I was hungry, so I would save my fruit and wrap it in plastic, and I would hide it underneath my bed so I wouldn't be hungry later on in the evening or at night. The officers would come and do a search. I get booked again for another 10 days, 15 days. So that 15 days that I went originally ended up to be 6 months for minor, very minor infractions. To be locked in a room and have no human contact almost drove me crazy. The only thing that really helped me is I put a picture of my children at the door I would get ready to speak out of, to talk to the other inmates, so I wouldn't get booked. And I would look at my children's pictures and say, Tara, get away from that door. And I would tell myself, they can take my mind, take my body, but I'm not going to let them take my mind. And it was hard. My last day in Seg, thanks to an officer, he went to lieutenant and said, please do not book her again. Please do not book her. She did enough time here in Seg for these infractions. And I left segregation the last time and I never turned back. Another time I was in isolation, literally in the basement of the prison, the old women's prison. When I say basement, I mean basement, cold, wet, freezing, no windows, a bench, not a bed, a bench, a metal bench to sleep on. And if the officers wanted to, they didn't give me a blanket or anything. I would freeze that some nights, How I kept my sanity, I would just read and distract myself and sleep as much as I could. But when the last time I left, I told myself I'll never go back to segregation, and I didn't. But for myself and for other people who've been there, I've seen women stab themselves with pens in their stomach just to leave the room to go to the hospital, to get out their environment, because they've been in that room for so long. It's inhumane, and I just hope that by me speaking helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Next, we'll move to Leonard Jefferson. Is Mr. Jefferson available? Good afternoon, Mr. Jefferson. We're here discussing House Bill 5740. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I had the pleasure, you might say, of being in the high security building maybe even before it was open. I might have been the first person or the first prisoner to be there. But I just want to speak about the way that I came to be there, because I was only there for like about 3 days. I was ill, definitely ill, right? I could not function. And I sought medical attention from the staff in maximum security and was denied that attention for days. And so it came to a point where I had to do something to let them know that I, actually seriously needed medical attention. So when it was time for the count and all the other prisoners locked up, I refused to lock in my cell. And for doing so, I was transported to high security building. There I was left in a room, which I can't describe at all because of my illness. I was unaware of my surroundings, but I know that I was in a high security building. I was left in that room for 2 or 3 days, and then staff came in and they decided to take my blood pressure. And it was sky high. It was something like 155 over 115. And then they decided, there actually was something wrong with me. So they started me on blood pressure medication, and they brought my blood pressure down to reasonable, within acceptable limits. And I was placed back in maximum security. So the point of what I'm saying to you is that I wasn't really a disciplinary problem, right? My issue was with medical, right? I was unable to acquire medical attention, so I wound up in high security. And I see by my clock, my 2 minutes is about up. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Thank you again. Next, we'll move to Chantel Nelson, Washington. Good afternoon. You're here before the House Committee on State Government and Elections, and you have the floor to discuss House Bill 5740. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less.
Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Chantel Washington. I serve as the Interim Executive Minister for the Rhode Island State Council of Churches. In considering passing H.
5740, the Restrictive Housing Act, on behalf of the Rhode Island State Council of Churches, we urge you to consider the cruel use of restrictive housing that tortures the mind and disintegrates the spirits of incarcerated people. The effects are very real, and I have seen firsthand how a close relative of mine was sent to High Side because there was nowhere else to put him. When he came out years later, he was ruined. He couldn't readjust. He couldn't stand hearing his own voice beyond a whisper. He couldn't be in public places unless he found the farthest corner of the room for solace. He came out broken and ultimately returned to prison, back to High Side, because there was nowhere else to put him. And he was sent to the psychiatric ward. Restrictive housing is cruel and unusual punishment for him. Intense anxiety and sensory deprivation are only a couple of the many harmful effects of this manner of long-term housing. Religious leaders in New York have endorsed a bill to end solitary confinement, and we, the Rhode Island State Council of Churches, stand in agreement that humane alternatives to long-term solitary confinement needs to be established. The inability to communicate and have contact with others exacerbates everything from paranoia to suicidal tendencies. We as faith leaders must advocate for the plight of prisoners. Please pass the Rhode Island Restrictive Housing Act and end the abuse of solitary confinement. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Thank you again. Next, we'll move to Haley McKee. Good afternoon, Haley. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Shanley. And good evening, Chairman and honorable members of the committee. My name is Haley McKee. I'm a person who was formerly incarcerated, and I am the Policy and Media Specialist for the Closed High Security Coalition. I've been working intensively on this issue with a coalition of many experts, organizations, and directly impacted individuals. Our coalition submitted a letter in support of this bill signed by 26 organizations and individuals, including the Rhode Island Commission on Human Rights, the Rhode Island Latino Policy Institute, the Black Lives Matter PAC, and the Rhode Island Public Health Institute. I want to emphasize that the reforms in this legislation have been demonstrated to increase safety within the prisons for the people incarcerated, correctional officers, and the communities people return to after prison. They have also been demonstrated to save money. Dozens of studies have established that this practice is cruel, unhealthy, expensive, and counterproductive. As RIDOC Director Patricia Cohen-Fay testified in front of the House Finance Committee in 2019, keeping people in cells 23 hours a day is not the way to go. And we quoted her there. As our understanding of the harms of solitary confinement has evolved, Rhode Island's use of prolonged solitary confinement persists. It is time to codify correctional best practices into law. Many other states have already implemented reforms to end the abuse of solitary confinement. In 2014, there were an estimated 80,000 to 100,000 people in restrictive housing nationwide, defined as being held in cell for more than 22 hours or more per day for 15 days or more. By 2019, there were between 55,000 and 62,000 prisoners in restrictive housing, a dramatic decrease. 15 states have already implemented substantial limitations on the use of solitary practice, outlined in the attached Nationwide Reforms and Best Practices memo that was submitted to you all. The Restrictive Housing Act follows the Commission recommendations and national best practices, which have been shown to actually make prisons safer. Of 11 states that published safety data after reducing the use of solitary confinement, 9 states saw decreased rates of violence, and the other 2 saw no increase in violence. For example, after reducing its long-term solitary population from 1,500 to just over 100 people, with an average length of stay from 28 months to 8, the Colorado Department of Corrections reported no increase in assaults on staff by prisoners. Reductions in restrictive housing in Colorado allowed the closure of a 316-bed facility in 2012, saving almost $15 million yearly in state taxpayer dollars. After reducing the solitary confinement population in the Red Onion State Prison, the Virginia Department of Corrections reported a 78% reduction in incident reports, a 91%
Haley,
decrease
can
in
you
industry
wrap up
grievances.
the testimony, please?
Will do. Thank you for your time and for your consideration, committee members. Thank you.
Thank you very much again. Any questions for Ms. McKee? Okay, next we'll move to Daniel Thomas. Good afternoon, Mr. Thomas. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less.
Good afternoon. Hope everyone is doing well. I haven't really been prepped exactly on what I was going to testify. I guess I could speak on past experiences on the good and bad. I do see the segregation as a useful tactic that they have to use, but a lot of the things going on once people are going to the segregation units, I do have seen to be unfair and unjust. But a lot of people are deserving, so I'm on the fence of whether it should be abolished or not. I do believe it's necessary, but it needs to be regulated in a stronger fashion.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your perspective. Any questions for Mr. Thomas? Next, we'll move to Roberta Richmond. Welcome, Roberta. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you very much, and welcome.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I worked at the Department of Corrections for 33 years. For 10 of those years, I was the warden of the women's prison, and the rest of my time, I was the assistant director of rehabilitative services. During those years, I spent many, many hours in the segregation units, in the high security center, and also as warden of women's in the segregation unit there. And I strongly urge the consideration of approval of this bill. For fiscal reasons, for operational and humane reasons, this practice is just not a wise use of taxpayer dollars. It poses a serious threat to the mental health of inmates housed in those units. I've always had grave concerns about placing those inmates, many of whom suffer from mental illness, in extended segregation. I've known some inmates who've spent months, years sometimes, in the seg units, and I can attest to the harm done. I believe that continued use of extended solitary confinement is a waste of state funding and is detrimental to both the inmates and to the correctional officers as well. Everything programmatically is limited in those units, and I've always believed actually that the portrayal of the extreme dangerousness of those individuals was largely exaggerated. I urge you and other stakeholders to follow best practices already followed in the federal government and in many other states that limit the use of segregation to far shorter periods of time, and to listen to the emotional words of those most directly impacted, the people who've experienced living in them. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to express my opinion.
Thank you very much for sharing your opinion. There's a question for you from Representative Agello. Representative Agello?
It's good to hear from you, Roberta.
Thank you, thank you.
Can you give us any idea of what the cost in terms of perhaps construction and whatever other costs to do something like this legislation seeks to do, to treat people more humanely?
Well, of course there'd be a cost. If we continue to keep the high security center open, which I have questions about it anyway, the cost of running that unit, as the cost of running the women's unit, is much higher than running the cost of any other unit. I don't, I've been out of the system now for almost 10 years anyway, and so I haven't really kept up with the budgetary issues, but in my experience back then, those were the most expensive units to run. The construction of the high security unit is built to be expensive. I mean, when you have 6 cells in a module and it requires 24/7 coverage by 2 officers on each shift, I mean, you can't, the numbers are pretty staggering. So adding rehabilitative staff and adding program staff, of course, is going to add to the cost. I think, strategically, my recommendation would be to close that unit, and I do have ideas about how that could happen. I wish I could be more specific about the dollars involved, and I regret that I cannot be.
Representative Agello?
If you have ideas about how things could be rearranged, I, for one, would really like to hear them or read them. So if you could put something on paper to the committee, that would be great.
Of course. Yes, I would be happy to do that. I've been talking about, having been around before the high security center was built, we housed inmates who needed segregation time in maximum security. And at one point, while I was the assistant director, in response to requests to significantly reduce budgets, we actually proposed closing high security and moving inmates there into a wing of the maximum security unit and how that could happen. I'd be happy to elaborate on that.
Please, thank you.
You mean now?
Any additional questions for Ms. Richmond? Thank you again for your testimony. Next, we will move to Nina Peer. Good afternoon, Nina. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Nina Peer. I'm a formerly incarcerated woman. I think that solitary confinement is very much inhumane for the simple fact that there's no privacy for women. You have personal hygiene problems, women have problems. Also, when you go to take a shower, you have to stick your hand through the slot to put handcuffs on so you can take a shower for less than 5 minutes to a cold shower to get back to a cold cell where you're freezing cold. The food is smaller portions, very small portions, so you starve for 16 hours, so the next day, like, you're starving. Then the rent, you get rent after 5 days of being locked up. I think that's that's not right at all. I'm formerly incarcerated. I got out of jail December 1st, 2019. I learned my lesson. I never want to go back there. I never want to see anybody go through that. From there on, I've been working since day one, since I've been out of prison, have held the same job for 2 years now. So I just want to see this bill passed. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much for testifying and keeping your testimony to less than 2 minutes. Any questions for Ms. Peer from members of the committee? No questions. Next, we will move on to Alyssa Kolaluka. Choosing not to testify. We'll move on to Donald Morgan. And for anybody watching at home, the next witnesses are going to be Deborah Harris, Dondi Alves, Nina Peer, actually Nina's already testified, Suzette Cook, Jeremy Lomax. So if you guys are all intending on testifying, please be available.
Come on, please, go away, bro.
Good evening. Is this Mr. Morgan?
Yes, hi, this is Donald Morgan.
Hi, you're signed up to testify in support of House Bill 5740. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
And thank you for hearing me. I'm speaking on my personal experiences in solitary confinement. I personally believe that it's torture. I mean, if there was a hell on earth, segregation in the ACI is it. You know, I went into deep depressions in segregation for a prolonged amount of time, months at times. I've been over a year at times, and that carried you know, with me outside of prison. You know, with severe anxiety, completely antisocial, and I wasn't that way before I went through this solitary confinement. Taking a serious toll on my life. I mean, it's ended relationships with my children that I still don't have a relationship with now because I wasn't able to have contact with them while I was segregated. And I just wish, you know, that it was amended some, you know, if anything, because the amount of time that's given out in segregation, it's way overkill, way overkill. And you know, that's my you know, my ideas on that.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to call in and share your ideas with us. Any questions from members of the committee for Mr. Morgan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Deborah Harris. Good evening, Ms. Harris. We're here discussing House Bill 5740 from Representative Diaz, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you. My name is Andy House. I'm formerly incarcerated, but my time in the Adult Correctional Institute, I spent 5 months in segregation. And in 5 months that I spent in segregation, they ignored my mental health and it reacted, it made my trauma come out a little more than it usually come out, and I was feeling suicidal, homicidal, depressed, but I couldn't get no attention because nobody would listen, nobody I can bang. And each time I banged down the door, they would come and give me another 30 days for segregation. So me coming out of segregation, I came out very damaged. My mental health was to the sky, my self-worth was at its lowest. I was bitter. And when I did address the mental health and told them about it, they put me back in segregation, pending to see a psychiatrist and everything. So, you know, as far as segregation and just that they give you in the Adult Correctional Institute, it needs to be changed because it's not helping nobody. It's really just making the matter worse. And I want to thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for taking the time to call in and share. Any questions for Mr. Alves? No questions. Thank you again and have a great night.
All right, thank you.
Next we have Deborah Harris. Good evening, Ms. Harris. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor to testify. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, I will. Okay, my name is Deborah Harris. I am a formerly incarcerated person. I work at Direct Action for Rights and Equality. Been there 5 years. I also have a Teen Matter suicide awareness due to being in solitary confinement. I was there for 30 days, being isolated, having ideation to suicide, seeing other women wanting to commit suicide. I just felt a lot of pain. I agree with Nina Peer when she said the cells are dirty, less food. They treat you, whatever they're going through at home, they bring it to the prison and they take it out on us women. And it's really a bad thing. And those feelings still stay with me right to this day. So I am here supporting this bill 5740. And thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions for the witness? Okay, next we will move to Jeremy Lomax. Good evening, Mr. Lomax. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor to testify. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Understood. Good evening, Chairman Shanley and honorable members of the committee. My name is Jeremy Lomax, and both of my master's research and my PhD research centered on biomechanics and understanding muscle function. I'm a resident of Providence and a pen pal and ally to people who are currently incarcerated, and as well as a general citizen generally just concerned with humane treatment of my fellow human. So a 2020 study on the body in isolation found that solitary confinement is associated not just with mental but also physical health problems. The same paper goes on to describe rashes, dry and flaky skin, and fungus developed in isolation. These conditions were, of course, found to be directly associated with the poor air quality and water quality within these solitary confinements. Participants also spoke frequently about chronic ailment in solitary confinement, musculoskeletal pain specifically, with one participant saying, "My body is like, I can't explain it. Like my skeleton feels like my skeleton is broken or something." It has been well known that regular physical activity allows to maintain a requisite level of muscle strength, whereas inadequate activation of muscle system leads to like crazy detrimental health effects. Basically, if you give people an hour of physical activity outside of their rooms, you're going to see that there's less muscle loss over the course of their time. There's going to be faster rates of voluntary muscle contraction, and furthermore, there's going to be less increase in the physical symptoms that are associated with loss of muscle, including weight fluctuation, multi-morbidity, or the possession of 2 chronic illnesses. There's a whole bunch more I can go on to, but we've been here listening to this all day, so I thank you for your time. And of course, I'm happy to provide any citations for the research that I just kind of threw at you today, and I strongly support the RHA.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions for Mr. Lomax? No questions. Thank you again. Next, we have Jesse Capisi. Good evening. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, Chairman Shanley and honorable members of the committee. My name is Suzette, and I am a resident, and I'm also an ally of the people who are currently incarcerated. Today I'll be reading some excerpts from letters from people inside the ACI. This is a quote from someone who chooses to remain anonymous. And it reads, "We fear quoting the prison policy because anytime we question the rules, we get taken to segregation for false booking. Officers do not respect inmates and treat us like we're children and keep us in a place with the threat of segregation that adds up to 30 days, 45 days over things so small and nonviolent. When we see the discipline board, it is held by Lieutenant Odin, who has no interaction with inmates, but always gives us the maximum time. Everything is segregation, like bringing food outside or walking around with a book of mail stamps. And if you are in a program of any kind, you are removed if you go too safe. So how are we getting help if we lose any progress or work to put in? We need someone outside to police the police in prison because we have no voice or outlet. And this place either breaks us and makes us never want to come back, or really makes us worse by giving us no hope since we don't get help or tools to be better. Just punishment, sake. If my voice matters in any way, please help to pass this bill into law because we need help." Now, Simon Briggs, who is currently incarcerated in HSC, wrote, "Most importantly, to the conditions of the inmate confinement, HSC should be shut down due to the administration sending inmates to high security 23-1 for nonviolent offenses and keeping us here without a charge or past our due time by policy." To close, Jaleel Nelson wrote, "There's no way I can leave a place like this and be with my freedom knowing that my friends are going through what I did. My statement is, I wish to support this bill to the fullest. Thank you for your time. I strongly support the RHA. Thank you."
Thank you very much, Ms. Cook. Any questions of Ms. Cook by the committee? No. Thank you again. Next, we'll move to Jesse Capisi. Good evening, Jesse. We're here discussing House Bill 5740, and you are signed up to testify in support. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you so much for your time, everyone. I appreciate it very much. Again, my name is Jesse Capice. I'm a professor of social work at Rhode Island College, and I have a doctorate in social work from the University of Connecticut, as well as a license to practice clinical therapy in Rhode Island. And I'm a lifelong Rhode Islander. I'm testifying tonight to remind this committee that 95% of all incarcerated people at the ACI will be released. Almost every single person who's locked up in Cranston right now will get out. And tonight you have heard and you will hear about all the terrible effects solitary confinement has on a person's mental health. You'll hear individual stories from people who are in solitary, and you'll hear summaries of basically 150 years worth of scientific inquiry, which has all concluded that subjecting a person to solitary confinement greatly results in a distinct set of emotional, cognitive, and social difficulties. When you hear these stories and data, do me a favor. Don't picture the mental health disruptions happening to someone in a prison cell. Picture them happening to people in your communities, because that's where these mental struggles will play out. The hallucinations, the shaking, the anxiety, those things are going to happen to people when they're released, when they're driving on I-95, when they're waiting in line at the grocery store. Can solitary confinement protect people? Sure, it can. If there is a person in prison who is completely out of control, harming themselves or others, time in solitary can ensure some safety. But that is solitary that lasts maybe 24 hours. So as much as I don't like the use of solitary confinement, I get that our prison system might need to be able to use it here and there. But we're not just using it for 24 hours. We're using it for weeks, months, years. What are we doing? What we're doing is creating much larger problems. We're planting the seed for catastrophes. Putting someone in solitary confinement produces temporary safety and delayed chaos. Solitary is creating a ticking time bomb of pain, disruption, maybe even violence. And that bomb isn't going off in the prison. It's going off in the community. Help reduce the risk of these bombs going off in the community by supporting this bill. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your efficient testimony. I appreciate it, Jesse. Any questions from members of the committee? No questions. Thank you again. Next, we'll move to Lillian Pickett. Lillian, welcome. We're here discussing House Bill 5740. You have the floor. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Shanley and honorable members of the committee. My name is Lily Pickett. I am a student, resident of Providence, and I'm a pen pal and ally of individuals currently incarcerated in the High Security Center. Today I'll be reading excerpts from 3 letters from people inside the ACI which speak to the impacts of solitary confinement on mental health. All of these people took a great risk by writing to me, and as is illustrated by this quote from someone inside high security who chose to remain anonymous, who said, "I hope this letter actually leaves the building. All the cops know of your communication and its ramifications. It's the nature of the beast. They will simply unseal the letters, copy them, reseal them, and send them to you. They do it every day. They will create a hit list to pass around. Some battles are worth fighting for." Jonathan Diaz, currently in high security, wrote, "High security is a 23-in-1 building, meaning that 23 hours of the day are spent inside a cell, and that's 1 hour to get recreation, shower, and phone calls. That's it." Quandell Husband, who is currently in maximum security, wrote, "At 16, I did 30 days in segregation. It changed me forever. No phone calls, no TV, 50 minutes out of my cell. Cold showers most of the time, all because a CO said I said something that I didn't say. A complete fabrication. I've seen people in seg who don't even know me or remember me, and I did 6 months with them. It's brutal and sad to watch someone's mind break, a person who you've had regular conversations with. You don't see them for a few years, and they can't even hold a 5-minute conversation. Thank you for your time. I strongly urge the committee to pass the Restrictive Housing Act."
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Pickett. Any questions from members of the committee? No questions. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move to Deborah Marini and then Jennifer Wood. Good evening, Deborah. This is Evan Shanley from the House Committee on State Government and Elections. We're discussing House Bill 5740. You have the floor to testify. Please limit your testimony to 2 minutes or less. We only have the room for another 10 minutes. Thank you again and welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, Chairman Shanley and honorable members of the committee. My name is Deborah. I'm a resident of Providence and a pen pal, friend, and ally of people who are currently incarcerated. Today I'll be reading excerpts from letters from people inside the ACI. The first excerpt is from someone who chose to remain anonymous for safety purposes. He writes, The news is saying that this building, high security, holds the most violent inmates that can't be around other inmates. That's 100% not true. If they would help me and treat me, I would never be in this building. I'd say half this building is here for mental health issues, and the other half is getting mental health issues from sitting in these cells all day doing nothing. I've seen inmates come to this building fine on no medications, stay here a couple years. Now they're all messed up in the head on medications and talking to themselves. It's nuts how these people lie to the outside world. I've been in this building now for 3 years, and I don't even know what the warden looks like because no one comes around. Something needs to give. How long are people at the State House going to keep letting this go on? And these following excerpts are from Quandell Husband, who's currently incarcerated in maximum security. He writes, we have no chance with the Brotherhood in here. They have each other's backs. So even on bookings that are clearly made up or flat out lies, we, the inmates, suffer. In reference to the disciplinary infraction process, he writes, we're supposed to have a hearing at a disciplinary board. I've never heard of a board with one person. Literally, there's no debate, no presentation of evidence, no testimony of witnesses, nothing. It's the officer wins every time. I've seen officers cuff inmates, beat them up, then book them for calling them names or kicking their cell doors, and said inmate gets 2 to 3 months in seg. No body of people should have this amount of free reign to terrorize, dehumanize, and manipulate us. He adds, if I get booked or any inmate gets booked, it's over. The officer is always believed, always. The captain told me this out of his mouth, quote, my officers are always right, end quote, a direct quote. This prison isn't dangerous at all. When something happens here, it's a cry for help. Whenever an officer is attacked or something, it's because of something they did, like spitting in inmates' faces, telling inmates to give them blowjobs, attacking inmates' mothers, kids, etc. It sounds crazy, but these things happen every day. I'm surprised there isn't a lot of inmates fighting officers the way they talk to us and talk about us.
Thank you, Ms. Marini. If you could submit any additional testimony you have in writing, we'd love to hear more stories that you have from inmates as well, but we are out of time for tonight.
Okay.
So please feel free to submit additional testimony in writing and we will review it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you again. We'll next move to Jennifer Wood. Good evening, Ms. Wood. Oh, this is Richard. Richard, how are you?
Oh, I'm just wonderful. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. We're here discussing House Bill 5740. We have 9 minutes left in the committee room, so if you want to make your testimony as efficient as possible, that would be much appreciated. Thank you again and welcome.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Richard Ferruccio. I'm the president of the Rhode Island Brotherhood of Correctional Officers. I'm honored to be able to speak with you today about this very important piece of legislation. I'm also a correctional officer with almost 37 years of experience at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections. My testimony today will be based on my years of experience at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections. This legislation before you is extremely dangerous and will jeopardize the safety and security of the inmates held at the Department of Corrections and the correctional line staff whom I represent. Of the thousands of bills submitted in the General Assembly and up for discussion, this bill, in my opinion, is the most dangerous bill that's in front of the Assembly. This legislation would significantly alter the discipline process at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections in all buildings. This is not a bill about closing the high security center or eliminating solitary confinement, which we do not have. But you know what? I don't know if I could address that in enough time. This legislation would extensively reduce the penalty for violations of the Department of Corrections discipline policy. It also states that no member of that vulnerable population shall be placed in any disciplinary confinement. This would basically give a get-out-of-jail pass to those under the age of 22, over the age of 55. Can you imagine in the Rhode Island communities that if we didn't hold those under the age of 22 and over the age of 55 accountable for breaking the law, you'd have chaos in society. If this was the law, then 82-year-old, and I'll say 82-year-old John Carrillo, who's serving a life sentence for a brutal murder of a Rhode Island correctional officer, Donald Price, in 1973, would not have been subject to any discipline when he stabbed another correctional officer at the maximum security prison in 2018. Or any inmate under the age of 22 who decides to ignore the prison rules and physically hurts or assaults another inmate, no discipline. This legislation significantly reduces the penalties for breaking the rules at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections and will create chaos. It was once explained to me by an inmate that doing time is the cost of doing crime in Rhode Island. It's basically like the cost of doing business. Inmates actually take that into consideration when they're committing a crime. I've seen it, a number of studies that show the average criminal will commit a dozen crimes before they are caught. I saw another study that put it at 24. What they look at is the penalty for the crimes. How much time are they going to actually do? Obviously, you commit a murder, it's usually a one-time deal because you're going to do some big bid. The cost of breaking and entering, for example, I'll use that. I've seen inmates break in, and they've told me they've broken into hundreds of houses before they're arrested. They serve very little time for it. So the cost of doing business. Ironically, if you were to change this law, and you want to enact this, I think you would see us criminally charge every inmate for a violation of prison rules. See, what you need to understand is the prison rules, the prison policy, basically mirror the criminal justice system. You know, almost every discipline violation can be matched up to a violation of Rhode Island general laws: stealing, threatening, possession of illegal drugs, and assault. I'd love to be able to speak to the person or the persons who wrote this legislation so I could determine what their true intent is. I know and I have an incredible amount of respect for the sponsors on this legislation. I must tell you that this legislation is dangerous, poorly conceived, and will jeopardize the safety at the ACI. The Department of Corrections, while not perfect, is one of, if not the best run Department of Corrections in the entire country. Our safety record more than supports that statement. We have an incredible group of men and women who put their lives on the line every day in the name of public safety. And what I just heard tonight begrudges their efforts. You may have all seen the Rhode Island Board of Correctional Officers tagline. It's on the letter that I sent, representing those who work the toughest beat in the state. Rhode Island correctional officers earned that because in the 70s and 80s, the ACI was a very dangerous place. Not because we didn't have a good group of correctional officers, but because there was no discipline, no control. The staff didn't have the tools to effectively manage the facilities. The Rhode Island DOC discipline process is one of the most important tools we have to manage our department. Today, the ACI is a very different place. We currently operate, as I stated earlier, one of the safest, best-run prison systems in the entire country. This legislation wouldn't undo that hard work and sacrifice to get where we are today. That tagline, the toughest beat, unfortunately, I now believe belongs to my brother and sister police officers working the streets of Rhode Island. They're dealing with some very difficult times. But if you pass this legislation, I'll tell you what, we will be back working the toughest beat. This legislation also will invalidate the tremendous amount of work that was done in the 2016 commission to study the use of solitary confinement at the Rhode Island ACI, which I was a member of. That commission spent an extraordinary amount of time to develop the discipline process we use today. It would be eliminated if this legislation became law. The commission created in 2016 was a result of similar legislative hearings. See, the commission held hearings on 10 different dates over 9 months. Many of the hearings went a lot longer than what you're going tonight. We went to midnight on a couple of them. We heard testimony from a number of subject matter experts in all areas surrounding corrections law and policy, relating to the use of solitary confinement, including physicians, psychiatrists, clinical psychiatrists, social workers, and officials within every relevant field at the Rhode Island Department of Corrections.
Richard, thank you very much for your testimony. I got 3 minutes left and would like to give Kathy Kelly an opportunity to say a few words before we lose the room. If you have anything you didn't get to, if you submit written testimony or additional written testimony, we'll certainly look at that closely, and I encourage you as well to reach out to the sponsor, and I'm happy to sit down with you as well with the sponsor to discuss this bill.
Thank you, Chairman Shanley. This is a pretty serious piece of legislation, so thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Last witness we have is Kathy Kelly. Good evening, Kathy. Welcome. We're discussing House Bill 5740. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left that we have the room for. We do have your written testimony. Anything in addition that you want to offer after hearing the testimony tonight and the testimony of Richard Ferruccio?
I'm sorry, Chairman. This is Jennifer Wood that you have on the line.
Okay. Ms. Wood, go ahead. You have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Shanley, and thank you, members of the committee and Representative Diaz. My name is Jennifer Wood. I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Center for Justice, and we represent incarcerated individuals, including individuals in long-term solitary confinement. I want to share 2 brief excerpts from incarcerated individuals with the committee this evening in support of this legislation. Jaleel Nelson, currently incarcerated in maximum security Rhode. Have you ever been in DCU? Locked up 23 and 1. If we get that 1 hour out of the cell, locked down with no showers, only chow food, no store order with food, only certain things in your cell, deprived of sunlight and blocked from the outside. Let me tell you, it does some things to your mind. It brings trauma, PTSD, and it's so bad you start talking to roaches and mice, seeing things you don't normally see. It's mentally and physically bad, and some people are stuck from 30 days. The most I've seen is 3 years. Can you imagine that? No, you can't. Please fix the inhumane things that they are doing to us. They are breaking our Eighth Amendment. In my experience, I've known people that have come here, good guys, and left with PTSD, different ways of thinking negatively, negative emotions. Honestly, I came here to Max at 20 years old. I'm 23 now. This place is so bad, I don't even want to live in Rhode Island any longer. I want to advocate for anything that will change this place. Marcel Montera in High Security wrote, I'm doing 100 days in discipline, the longest I've done at one time. Other inmates have done 18 months. My day consists of 22 hours in my cell and 15 minutes. I get 1 hour of rec, locked in a cage with another inmate, and a 10-minute shower. On the weekends, I'm locked in 24 hours a day. I believe that the more we remain in these housing units, the worse we become. You are putting a human being in a cell for 48 hours straight at a time, for months at a time, and expect that person to remain stable. Treat someone like an animal, and they may behave like an animal. Thank you for your time, and I strongly support this legislation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wood. Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you again. We'll now move to Kathy Kelly, who is the final witness tonight on House Bill 5740. Good evening, Ms. Kelly. You are here before the House Committee on State Government and Elections. You are the last witness on House Bill 5740. Unfortunately, we have pretty much run out of time, so just do your best to limit your testimony to whatever extent possible.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me. Members of the committee, thank you for having me.
If you could turn off the audio feed from the television or your computers, that would be great.
Thank you. So, again, thank you for having me this evening. I have submitted written testimony. I'm going to try very hard not to repeat it. I am also going to move away from certain issues that Richard covered for us. I do have to say the Department of Corrections agrees wholeheartedly with Richard's testimony. We are one of the best prison systems in the country. The Department of Corrections has some significant concerns with portions of this bill. I will point out that there are a lot of things in this bill that the department already does, and I've listed those in my written testimony. There are a lot of things we would like to do. Increased programming, services, more step-down programs, more mental health services. All of that is going to cost money. In 2016, we met with the commission. We created a residential treatment unit based upon assurances that we would be given money to create that unit. The Department of Corrections received no funding, yet created the residential treatment unit anyway. And it has been extraordinarily successful. But we do not have the funds to implement the provisions in this bill. It is impossible. Our infrastructure also, I believe Representative Geraldo asked about the cost of infrastructure. There are provisions in this bill such as letting individuals out of cell for 6 hours a day who are in administrative confinement. That will not happen unless we have new facilities and extensive increases in staffing, both mental health, therapeutic, and security staff. This bill without funding is impossible. It is an unfunded mandate that the Department of Corrections cannot meet. I need to point out right now there are 7 lawsuits that we're litigating in federal court that deal with these very issues. We are in mediation on every one of those cases with, in fact, Jennifer Woods and Natalie Friedlander, who both know what's been going on in mediation. We are working to resolve these issues. There are ACLU lawyers, Center for Justice lawyers, National Prison Project, lawyers from California, the Disability Rights Rhode Island is representing the plaintiffs. We have 3 national experts around the table talking about what is the best practice in a prison setting to maintain safety and security, care for those who have mental illness, care for those who have behavioral disorders, and still run a safe and secure prison. I implore this committee to give us the opportunity to work through this mediation process and not pass a piece of legislation which is misguided, costly, and doesn't at the end of the day address our concerns. One last thing I'd like to point out, I agree with Representative Diaz. We have a number of individuals in this system who need help. They need mental health, they need housing, they need jobs, they need job training, and that is costly. We have on any given month, any given quarter, 3.5% of the population in restrictive housing. That averages out to 80 individuals, 72 individuals, and the vast majority of them are in disciplinary confinement for less than 30 days. The fact is, to spend the amount of money that we're talking about, if this bill passes, when there are funds that are needed to provide to individuals who are doing the right thing, that 97% that are doing the right thing and trying to work through the rehabilitative process, the funding needs to go to them. So I implore this committee, wait for the mediation, see what transpires out of mediation, and I can tell you that the issues will be resolved through the federal court. Thank you. I appreciate your listening to me. I appreciate the time and attention you've given to this issue.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Kelly. Any questions from members of the committee? Representative Knight.
Kathy, it's Jason Knight. I just wanted to say thank you for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
Well, that will conclude testimony on House Bill 5740. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Representative Knight, seconded by First Vice Chair Messier. We're adjourned.